If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this. What is the most mysterious and otherworldly phenomenon or unexplained thing you have experienced or seen that still gives you chills? The Phantom Wolf. This happened a few years ago and really stuck with me. I was walking with my father through my parents' subdivision. There were no trees or bushes, just lawns and homes. There was no place for a large animal to hide. As we walked through an empty intersection, no traffic around or barking dogs or anything like that, completely quiet, I suddenly heard a very low growl. Startled, I turned and looked behind me for the source of the sound. The first was so low as to almost be inaudible. The second growl, however, was very loud and clear, and we both heard it. It sounded like a wolf, not a dog. The growl was right behind us, clearly coming from the empty intersection we just passed through. The growl was vicious sounding and menacing. We turned to each other and compared notes. My father hadn't heard the first growl, but I had. The second, louder growl was heard by us both. We didn't know what to think, so we kept walking. When we finished our walk and returned home, we found a dead deer lying against the front of the house. When someone came by later to dispose of the body, they commented that it had probably been hit by a car and had wandered around, confused, until it died at that spot. When I mentioned this event to my sister, she commented that my father had been interested in Zen Buddhism for a while, but when he tried to meditate, he kept hearing growling animals around him every time. Because of this strange phenomenon, he had to give up his attempts at meditation. And, interestingly, a few years earlier I'd had a dream where an elderly woman told me, "You know your father is a wolf demon, don't you?" Unexplainable scary entities. It was a few years ago when I was in high school. I was visiting my godmother. Her lungs were in a really bad state, she was sick all the time and had pneumonia after pneumonia. We were in bed that night watching TV before going to sleep. She had a large bed, and I was sleeping next to her because she was sick, so I can be there if she needs anything. We turned off the TV and went to sleep. All of a sudden I awoke and was overcome with dread. Then the television turned on by itself. The remote was not near me or my godmother. Then I looked to her side of the bed, and, I kid you not, there was something like a black dog standing there. It had black, shiny eyes. I was completely stunned. I took my phone to distract myself, and it went away. The next morning, my godmother told me she had an awful nightmare about a black dog. Also, after a while, I was in her apartment alone. I saw a shadow pass through a corridor. I went to check after a while, and the light, which I firmly remember I left on in the kitchen, was now turned off. There was a constant atmosphere of negativity and dread. After a year and something, all those things stopped happening. Does anyone know what those things were? And how did it all just go away all of a sudden? Are those things attracted to negativity? Unexplainable occurrence in my old home 10 years ago. I hated ghost stories and paranormal activities. Most of the time they are made for a quick scare and mostly false, although some are very good. I'm not going to force anyone here to believe me, but I swear on my entire life and my family's lives that this is 100% true and I'm not making this up. It's a long story, but I'll make it as short as possible. Let me start by saying I'll remember this until the day I die because it's something that marked me and made me change my mind about ghosts as a whole. When I was younger, about 10 years ago, me and my mother would watch movies together in her room. I would always pick the film, and this time around my favorite film at the time, Cool Dog. I can assure you the film is complete dog shit. Halfway through the film, my mom turns on her side because she cannot watch it any longer. Near the end though, the bedroom door handle started violently shaking. When I say violent, I mean the thing was goddamn shaking of the hinges violent. For context, my mom had switched all the door handles in our apartment, so instead of pulling down to open a door, you would have to pull upwards to open it. Don't ask why, I myself don't know why she chose to do that. Anyway, this goes on for about 10 to 15 minutes of constant up and down, but the door stays completely shut throughout, not opening once. The fear I felt at that point, I've never felt anything like it since. I've looked for answers, scientific explanations, and some reason why this could have happened, but I haven't found any. No one was home, only us, and no windows were open, so no wind, if you can think that the wind was the cause of this anyway. It turns out that the person who lived there before us was an elderly man named George. A week later, my mom asked about him to several neighbors. It turns out that the old chap died in the apartment, and you'll never guess where they found the body. In front of my mother's bedroom. She died of a heart attack. Make whatever of this story, believe me or not, I know what I saw, I know what happened, and it haunts me for life. I grew up in a house built in 1805-ish, possibly slightly before. This house still has almost all the original doors and floors. Once my brother moved out, I was able to move into the basement, right off the kitchen. One night, I had sneaked my girlfriend over, and we were lying in bed watching ATHF. All was quiet until someone knocked on the door. Expecting it to be my mom, she jumped up and hid in the ensuite bathroom with the lights off. The door was rapped on again, but this time it shook the thin door violently. I thought for sure we were busted. I open it to an all-black kitchen. No one was there. I go to shut the door, and I can hear my girlfriend whispering behind me. I lock the door again and go to tell her about it being no one, and she is hunched over in the bathtub, crying. I ask her what happened, and she says that I creeped her out because I wouldn't answer her and just stood there staring at her in the dark like a weirdo. Shit puts a knot in my stomach every time I relive it. This took place about 4 months ago at about 10 p.m. in downtown, Wheeling on Main Street. We were driving on the bridge and looked over at the bridge branching off to Main Street and saw it. Now it was about 7 feet tall but was not human. It didn't walk, glide, or fly, it just moved in a nondescript way. It had no seeable head, and none of the limbs were also nondescript but still there. The other main reason we know it wasn't human was that it was a very, very, deep black and just moved across the road about 15 feet in front of us and crossed. We turned around, but like a typical shadow figure, it was nowhere to be seen. The reason I'm sharing this is I've put hundreds of hours, maybe thousands, into researching the unexplainable and mysterious things of this world, but this thing doesn't fit the description of anything except basically less fancy, less detailed, and dark, slender man, but it's also kind of like the Wheeling Hempfield Railroad Bridge ghost, which isn't that far away. I'm kind of starting to stress over this, it's driving me crazy not being able to explain it at all. Me and my moms don't think that there is no way that no one else has seen this thing before, just people who could have come out with it. So if you're ever crossing into Wheeling, West Virginia, late at night with nobody around, just look around, you just might catch sight of what my mom saw that night. But if anyone has any clue what it may be or if they think they've seen it, please, I'd love to discuss, as I've tired my parents out of talking about it. Unexplained crying. Not sure if this counts, but this morning I woke up to the sound of someone crying. There was only one other person in the house, so I waited to see if I heard it again. I must have drifted off and heard crying coming from the bathroom on the same floor as my bedroom again. My bedroom is on the top floor, and the stairs are quite creaky, so I can always tell who's moving around the house. Anyway, the crying continues, and the bathroom door opens, and I hear footsteps. Then there was a knock on my door, so I said hello a couple of times to see who it was and if they wanted to come in and talk. However, no one is there. I went downstairs later in the day and asked my housemate, the only other person that has been in the house, if they were crying this morning, and they said no, they've been upstairs the whole time. So no idea who I heard or why they knocked on my door, but if it happens again, I'll be moving out straight away because that's some horror film stuff right there. Unexplained late night noises. I moved into a new house with my family at the end of December. We moved to a new state, and my parents had a house built because it was the first time they ever were able to do so. I'm a broke college student that's trying to save money wherever they can. So when my parents said I could stay with them and just pay $300 in rent a month, I immediately agreed. I live in the basement with my parents' room just above mine. The basement is a more modern-day basement. Meaning it has a walkout, doors leading to the backyard, and full-size windows. About a week after we moved in, I got home from work a bit later than expected. Normally I work the morning shift, but I got stuck working an evening shift, and the night shift was late to replace me. So I ended up getting home around midnight. After I changed out of my work clothes, I laid down in bed and was starting to drift off when I heard a loud bang outside my window. Now I'm an avid horror fan and a follower of real-life, unexplained phenomena. However, because of this, I'm very skeptical of things I can't explain. So naturally I shrugged it off the first time I heard it and went to sleep. Then another week later I was woken up again by a banging. This time I blamed it on auditory hallucination. Like, maybe I had imagined hearing it because I was just waking up. It made sense in my half-awakened mind, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized the noise woke me up, so I couldn't have imagined it. Around the same time, I started to notice a tapping noise on my window. That I later found out was caused by my parents walking above me and my vent not being secured correctly. So I thought the banging was being caused by something similar. However, this banging noise only happens late at night after my parents are already asleep. It happens every day for a number of weeks, then goes quiet for a week and starts back up again the same way. There's never any footprints outside my window in the morning, and I've never seen someone standing outside when I go to check it out. I'm at a complete loss for what could be causing this noise. I'm really freaked out by it, and I dread staying up later than 9 p.m. because I know the banging will start around then. I know I'm not crazy because my mom has told me she's heard it a few times, and my dog normally starts to growl right before I hear the banging. Has anyone else experienced this? What should I do? My parents are talking about getting a camera installed facing towards the backyard corner my window is in, but that most likely won't help. I don't think the noises are human-made. I don't know what it is. I'm just scared and looking for answers. Can anyone give me some advice on how to proceed from here? What could be causing this? After graduating from college, I moved into the basement at my parents' house. It was a finished basement, open floor plan with 2 bedrooms separated by a game room and a bathroom. The floors were tiled, so sounds carried. When my grandparents came to visit, my grandma would sleep in the other bedroom down there, close to the bathroom. She had a distinct shuffle/walk, and when they were in town, I would hear her going to the bathroom all night. She passed away, and a few weeks later, I'm laying in bed at night watching TV in my room when I hear the shuffle walk to the bathroom. I paused what I was watching, so confused because no lights came on, and if you came down into the basement, you would have had to pass my room to get to the other one, but no one passed by. Then I heard the shuffle walk from the bathroom back to the bedroom. I got up and investigated, but no one was there. I would hear it periodically, a distinct shuffle walk to the bathroom, then back to the bedroom. I heard it so much I just figured it was just some house noise and stopped giving it any thought when I heard it. Well, one day, I need a light bulb but can't find one anywhere, so I start digging deep in the linen closet, next to the bathroom by the other bedroom. On the top shelf behind a bunch of towels and sheets, I find a box. I thought that was strange, so the next day I asked my mom what the box was. It was my grandma's ashes. I kept hearing the shuffle walk but did my best to ignore it, but every time I thought if it was her. That summer, we spread her ashes at the beach. After that, it was never heard again. I'm getting the chills just typing this up. Unexplained light, aliens/UFOs. This incident occurred when I was approximately 7 or 8 years old. I live in Washington State, which, to the best of my knowledge, doesn't have a ton of reported UFO sightings, but I believe what I saw this night was one. So it was around 2 a.m. when I woke up for an unexplained reason. I'm not sure why I woke up, I just did. Then maybe a minute later I notice a super bright light starting to fill my room. It was almost as if a car was shining its headlights in, but I lived on a secluded road in the middle of nowhere, and my room was on the 3rd floor, so that theory is almost impossible. Now, you would think that this happening to a child would startle them, and I was a pretty easily scared kid, but for some reason I felt nothing but intrigue. I walked over to my window and looked out. I could not make out where the light was originating from, but my entire front yard, which was pretty big, was lit up like it was broad daylight. As I was looking out, all the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Not like when you're scared, but like there was a ton of energy in the air causing static. Then, just as quickly as it appeared, the light just vanished, the hairs on my neck laid down, and everything went back to normal. Still to this day I have no idea what that was, but I strongly hope that someday I might find out. Please help me identify what my husband saw. My husband doesn't make stuff up, so I was shocked by what he told me he saw about 2:30 a.m. this morning. He said he got up and went to the front door like he does most nights to look outside. He said while he was looking around the neighborhood he heard a strange clicking sound, so he said he stepped outside on the stoop and continued to hear the clicking sound. He then walked to the end of our sidewalk by the street. He finally saw something unexplainable across the road at a nearby building by the church. The creature was approaching the road, seemingly dragging one of its feet. So he went on to describe it to me. He said it was about 3.5 to 4 feet tall, its skin was a grayish color, its head was shaped like a football, it had long, skinny arms and legs, but its knees were bent backwards from ours. He said he couldn't believe what he was seeing, so he moved across the street to get a closer look, and his slides made some noise on the gravel, and the creature looked at him with these huge eyes that were bigger than 50-cent pieces and slowly turned around and headed back in the direction it came from. Has anyone else ever seen or heard of a creature like this? If anyone can give me any information about what he saw, please let me know. Thanks. Unexplained sighting. Can anyone make a suggestion? As an 8-year-old child, I lived near the coast in northern Tasmania. One day I was walking down along the shore with my aunt, and I noticed something largish that had washed up on the beach, so I ran ahead to have a look. It was obviously deceased, but decomposition had barely started. It was not bloated at all, but what it was left me and my aunt confused. It was the size of a small German Shepherd dog. It had a head like a brown seal and the front flippers of a seal, but its back legs were like a dog. It also had the color of a brown seal, and if it wasn't for the rear end of the creature, I would have just thought it was a dead seal. It had 2 separate legs and paws. It was clearly one animal, not 2, that somehow was either joined together by a taxidermist or someone practicing. We ended up leaving it alone and never reporting it to anyone, but now I am an adult in my 40s and still have no answer to what it was that I saw that day. Any ideas on what this creature could have been? I have heard rumors of a similar type of creature from remote southern Tasmania, but this one was much larger and slightly different. The creature from southern Tasmania had the front legs of an elephant. Its mouth was open, and it was as large as a doorway. A person could easily walk inside. It had been shot at with what looked like a shotgun, so the locals assumed that a fishing boat had noticed it, and the crew were spooked and shot it. The rear end was similar to a whale with flippers. It appeared in a town called Dover. The local adults ran to the beach to see what was going on. They sort of shepherded it back into the water, and it left. It made no aggressive movements towards them. The locals were just scared, as they had no idea what it was. I have often considered that perhaps it came on land to heal or to die, but this one I did not see myself. I was told about that one from my stepfather, who at the time was reluctant to tell me. He is a very down-to-earth person and would not have invented a fantastical tale such as that. I could tell by his reluctance to tell me that it was an honest story and that he was concerned about ridicule for repeating what he had seen. I am just confounded by what seems to be crossbreeding land animals and aquatic animals. Or perhaps not crossbreeding, but what appears to just be a mixture of both. Any suggestions regarding either matter would be greatly appreciated. The unexplainable shadow. This happened about 7 years ago. I was 8 years old at the time. Before I begin this story, I want to let the reader know that my memory is accurate and efficient at remembering events, plus I wrote the details of this event down on paper after I witnessed it. I was living in India at the time, in an apartment on the 14th floor. Being so high up meant that there was no other structure as tall as ours, and the building was mostly surrounded by dense trees that were obviously far lower than the 14th floor. One particular night, I was playing in our living room with a Hot Wheels car of mine. I remember that I was driving the car across the wall right next to our television, but then I saw something strange. I saw a shadow in the shape of a cartoon lightning bolt, moving slowly across the wall in a curvy up-down pattern. I backed away from the wall to see if it would still keep moving, and it did. Now, on the opposite end of the room from where my TV was, there was an extremely small balcony of ours. Naturally, I turned around and looked outside, but there was nothing there except darkness. It was 9 in the night. When I looked back at the wall, the cartoon lightning was gone as well. Now let me explain why this was so weird. There was no way a shadow of that shape could be produced from any object in my living room, plus the shadow was moving in a slithering pattern across the wall. Even from outside my balcony, there was nothing there to produce a moving shadow. There were no buildings, no lights, and not even a levitating cartoon shadow figure. Nothing. I know that this story isn't scary in the least, but I genuinely can't explain it. Anyone care to explain somehow? I'm looking for theories. Unexplained experience. For the longest time, I've thought about sharing this story publicly to see if anyone has had a similar experience or feedback. This happened about 9 years ago. I was in the 7th grade and lived in Spring, Texas at the time. My best friend at the time's name was Bailey, and to be honest, strange things always seemed to happen when we were together, but this time has always stood out the most. Bailey was living in a bit of a rural neighborhood with woods and a set of train tracks. All the houses were spread apart a tad farther than suburbs, and some of her neighbors even had a few farm animals. Anyways, she was my best friend, and our favorite thing to do was go on late night walks and talk for hours. It was a really regular thing for us. One night we were walking, and a cat joined us, trotting along in front. We both thought it was super cute, and were happy to have a friend join us. We had been walking for a bit now, and I wasn't super familiar with where we were. We had just turned a corner where to the right of us was someone's side yard that was fenced and had a few horses that were eating and doing their own thing, far from the fence. Ahead of us to the left was a normal-looking house. Now, out of nowhere, the cat that had been walking ahead of us stopped very suddenly and ran away. As me and Haley walked toward, at the exact spot the cat had stopped, it was as if we walked into a thick, heavy air of the worst energy you can imagine. It's as if time stopped and I felt sick. The house ahead of us to the left became our focus. One by one, every light in the house turned on, then off. At least from the windows we could see, then a loud scream came from that direction. It was bone-killing. As we turned around to run, the horse that had been on the other side of the yard was directly behind us, leaning over the fence and looking in the direction of the house. Now it was pretty terrifying when you were not expecting that, and Bailey nearly passed out. I had a strong feeling we needed to get out of that area, so I supported Bailey the best I could and helped us speed walk away, guessing which directions to go since at this point Bailey was half out of it. We got to her house safely and didn't talk about it until hours later. The only thing I have left to describe the whole thing was that it felt like a memory was playing out in front of us, and I had never felt so unsafe. Let me know what you think. Strange light spotted above Joshua Tree Campground. I am camping in Joshua Tree with some friends, and we had been talking about UFOs and extraterrestrial experiences, hoping we could see something in the desert. When the campfire died and everyone returned to their tents, my boyfriend and I stayed out and smoked a couple joints, watching the stars and noticing how bright and incredible they were out here in the desert. We were looking around at the bright constellations when this beaming bright light popped into our view, flying over like a dragonfly. It was floating, moving erratically, but hovering above his mountain/village a little ways from our sight. We watched it for about 30 minutes in complete awe before it flew away. Both my boyfriend and I saw it, and I tried to take as many videos and pictures that captured it as possible. The video doesn't even do it justice. It was an incredibly bright, beaming white light that would flash red and blue. And radiating from the center of this light were these beaming, colorful lights. It was like how cartoonish suns are drawn, but the rays in this case were all different colors that radiated in a circular pattern. Red beam, orange beam, yellow beam, red beam, blue beam, green beam. The camera couldn't even pick up the insane light patterns it was creating in the sky. I've shown it to all of my friends, one of whom intervened for NASA in college, and no one could debunk it. It can't be a drone, and it was a million times brighter and bigger than a plane and moved too erratically or hovered in a way that wouldn't make sense. Let me know what you think. I'm open to all theories or debunking. My sister and I once went on a road trip to a town that didn't exist. I don't even know what state we were in at that point. We were somewhere in that giant desert that covers most of New Mexico through SoCal, driving across the country. Hard to know where because there was just nothing on that stretch of highway. Just 2 lanes in the desert that stretch on for hours and hours. The kind of place with signs warning you to get gas because the next station isn't for 200 miles. Anyway, we'd been driving all day, and the sun was getting lower, so when we saw an exit coming up, we figured we'd better take it, right? Not likely to get another chance for a while. We pull off and go around this little hill so we can hear the highway but not see it, and pull into this little town. At first, we didn't think much of it. It's just nice to see lit buildings, honestly. But as we start looking around for a motel, I realize something's weird. There are lit buildings, sure. But there aren't any people. No one on the sidewalks by the parked cars, not even servers in the lit diner, no shopkeepers visible in the windows, no one. Which, weird. But it's getting later, and I've been in a few towns where the sidewalks roll up early. Then I look at the cars and buildings themselves. And they're weird. It's normal for small towns to be old-fashioned, but these weren't run down, like the cars and buildings were old and just kept up. They looked like brand new, just in the style of the 1950s. The cars all looked like antiques that had been perfectly renovated. The buildings were all done up in that style. It was like being on a movie set. And it's still totally empty of people. Eventually we found a motel. We walk into the lobby, doors open just fine, all light up. Still super 50s style. The desk had an honest-to-God rotary phone on it and a paper ledger next to the till. And there's no one here. We look around some, wait a while, call hello, nothing. Finally, I was like, this place is too weird. I feel like if we slept here, we'd never get back out. So we got back in the car and left. Now this town, like a lot of small towns off the highway, had basically one main road that made a loop, connecting to the highway on both ends. We got off going north, looped east, went back south to get on the highway, and started driving west on the highway again. So we should have seen the exit we took to get into the town in a few miles at most, right? Nothing. We drive about 10 minutes, and there are no exits. We figure maybe we got turned around and missed it. Not like there were other cars on the highway, so we just flipped a U and went the other way for a half hour or so. No exits. We flip around and try again. It's a 2-lane highway in the middle of the desert, and it's getting dark. If nothing else, we should see a lighter sky in the direction of town. We see no hills, no lights, and no exit. Nothing. Eventually we just slept in the car. I still have no idea what went on that day. My uncle's house. When I was younger, my uncle Patrick and my aunt Christy lived in this old house for a long time. My dad and I lived there sometimes with them when we were struggling, or I would stay there so my aunt and uncle could babysit me while my dad was working or out doing other things. This particular house was painted faded yellow, had green shutters, and stood next to a large field. Beyond that field were dense dark woods, and the house itself was extremely old, so no one thought anything of it when they heard creaks and groans and weird sounds at night. Yet, whenever I was there, for some reason weird things happened to me, weird, unexplainable things that I could never make sense of. It all started one night when I was around 7 or 8, and my Uncle Patrick and Aunt Christy were watching me while my dad was out having fun and partying, which was normal for him. Well, I was sleeping in the playroom on the floor next to the vent to stay warm because it was winter time, and right above my head was a window. For some reason, and I don't remember what it was, I developed this sudden urge to look out the window. I knew it was a terrible idea, but I did it anyway. Outside the window was a large oak tree, and when I looked out the window, sitting in the oak tree was an old man. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I mean, why would an old man just be sitting in my uncle's tree? I was terrified but didn't want to look away. I remember what he looked like as if it were yesterday. The old man was skinny, and he was wearing these old torn-up robes that hung off his body. His skin was this weird gray color, and he had an abnormally long crooked nose. The scariest part about him, though, was his eyes. His eyes were red, but not a normal red, it was as if they were glowing red. This made me think that this was no normal old man. After I had gotten a good look at him, I hurried up and laid down and covered up my head, hoping he hadn't seen me. I thought about going to tell my aunt and uncle, but then thought to myself that they wouldn't believe me, and in addition, I was too scared to do anything. I was scared to move, and I was scared to make a sound. I mean, what if he saw me? What if he was outside the window right now, waiting for me to move, or waiting for me to try and look at him again? I decided to stay where I was for the rest of the night. But that's not the last time weird stuff happened to me there. Sometimes it would be footsteps or waking up to seeing shadows standing in a corner watching me. And one night it was having a box fan thrown at me while I was sleeping. I didn't know if it was that old man or some other entity, but I do know that it scared the shit out of me. Eventually your Uncle Patrick and Aunt Christy moved out and got a new place, and the other day my bigger sister took me by that house, and it's been completely remodeled, and it's gray now. I'll never forget that house or the night that I saw the old man with the glowing red eyes. When I was about 19, I was driving home from work on a country road. I noticed there was traffic, which was unheard of at the time, and looked ahead up the road to see if I could tell what was going on. I was probably 6 or 7 cars away from this big old woody station wagon that had half pulled to the side of the road. There was a fire in the engine and a woman outside the car, running around it and screaming my babies, just as the entire car became engulfed in flames. It was horrific. A ball of fire with a woman desperately trying to get to her trapped kids. Out of what seemed like nowhere, a man walked up to the car, stuck his hand through the flames, and then disappeared into the fire. A few seconds later, he came out carrying a baby and a toddler. Right before the explosion, I saw them strapped in the back in car seats. A few minutes later, as I was able to pass the scene, I saw the man up close. He was holding the baby, and neither had a scratch on them. He wasn't even sweating. He winked at me as I passed. The station wagon was almost just a frame by then. The interior was gone. I then went home and figured I'd just not really seen what happened. There were no cops on the scene or anything. This all happened in a matter of minutes, so it was simple to dismiss as a trick of the eye. But I did tell my dad what I'd seen. He kind of rolled his eyes and told me to quit smoking so much pot. The next day, however, on the front page of the newspaper was the headline, "Miracle on Bloomfield Road." There was an interview with the man, the mom, and other witnesses. He said when he touched the door handle to open it, it didn't burn him. The flames around him didn't touch him. Both he and the children were fine, not even a blister. The mom, however, couldn't touch or get near the car without being burned. She was injured trying to get in, as were others. She also said, along with the rest of the witnesses, that the man didn't come from a car or leave in one. No one really knew who he was or where he came from. There were literally 20, 30 other people who saw exactly what I did. The mother in the article was quoted as saying it was a miracle. And for what it's worth, I really believe her. My eyes weren't playing tricks on me. I saw a man enter a car that was no longer recognizable as a car, it was just a giant fireball, and he came out completely unharmed while saving 2 babies from a certain death. Even the fire department couldn't make sense of it. And they really tried. I don't know if he was a guardian angel or what. I wouldn't even try to know. All I know is that I saw a miracle that many others did as well. Even my dad, who is an atheist, believed in it after reading the paper. This isn't the weirdest thing that's ever happened to me, but it's up there. I wanted to share a story that has a happy ending. Is there an explanation for this? Is this a known paranormal phenomenon? I live in Illinois and have had a couple paranormal experiences as a kid, but nothing since I'm 30 now. Earlier this year in March, I had a half-full cup move right in front of me. Thought okay, definitely paranormal, but best to just ignore, so I told my wife, and we just forgot about it. Saturday I was going to bed at like 2 a.m. after gaming, put on one of my downloaded history radio shows on Spotify to fall asleep too, like I always do, and put it on airplane mode because I keep it next to my head so I can hear it without it disturbing my wife. Well, I was dozing off and I started to hear static, and the only word I can think of to describe it is demonic or hellish speaking, almost whispering, breaking through the show. I could still hear the show host speaking a word here and there in the background, but he was static, and the voices were so weird it woke me right up, and I started to try and hear if I could figure out what it's saying or what's going on, but I couldn't and was late, so I just turned it all the way down and went to bed. My first thought was paranormal, but I couldn't be sure. Never had anything like that happen before, so I ignored it, but yesterday my wife was at her desk when the monster she was drinking moved twice in front of her. We're not really afraid, but I really want to know if anyone has experienced or heard of something like that happening through my phone speakers? Is there an explanation for what may have happened? I'm almost afraid to listen at night now, as I fear it might happen again. Thanks for any input. The unexplainable figure I saw at the age of 10. To start this off, I want to say this took place in my grandparents' house. Me and my mom lived with them at the time. During this time period, my grandparents went on vacation for a month and let me and my mom sleep in their room because they had an AC in there. I remember one of those days watching Shane Dawson's conspiracy theory videos. This is before he was cancelled, and one of them included the boogeyman. I can't remember the exact description he had given about the boogeyman, but I do know I was very on edge about it. I didn't think much of it after a while, and that night I had gone to go sleep with my mom in my grandparents' bed. I had knocked out first and then my mom second. I woke up at exactly 1:10 a.m. to this horrible feeling of dread that I was being watched. Another important thing to note is that my grandparents' room has a back door out to the patio/backyard. They used these window divider things instead of curtains, which did block out the view from inside. However, there was a tiny bit at the top of the window that was showing because the dividers weren't tall enough to cover it. Now when I woke up, I saw the time, and then I turned my head only to see it. I don't know what the ducat actually was, but that was the first time I experienced genuine fear. It was pitch black in their room, and the patio light was on. It was censored and only came on when there was something outside. At the little opening at the top, I could see what looked like the top of someone wearing a potato sack. Now this thing had to be at least 7 feet considering how I could see it on the top of the window. It looked like it was looking and pressed against the glass, but it couldn't see anything because of the dividers. I desperately tried waking my mom up, but she was dead asleep due to taking sleeping pills. I was so scared that I hid under the covers and started praying nonstop until eventually I fell back asleep. I seriously saw this thing with my own 2 eyes, and I know it was real. It wasn't a dream, it was real time, and it was definitely there. It was gone in the morning, but ever since I think about it a lot, I try to find answers or info on whatever it was I saw. I always remember the boogeyman wearing a potato sack like the one I saw on the figure. That's why I assumed it could have been him considering me watching that video about him earlier. If anyone saw something similar or knows anything about the figure, please comment. I would like to know more about this. This happened in 2018. Me, my ex-boyfriend, and my ex-best friend decided that it was a good idea to visit an abandoned theme park. Its name is Loudon Castle, located in Scotland. We drove there probably about 11 p.m. The drive was about an hour and a half from where I lived. The main car park was obviously closed, so we managed to find a small, single-lane road that you could park at the side and walk to the park through the woods. Just up from the road, I could see a caravan. It was rusty, had no windows, and had no one in it. I didn't feel right when I saw it, there was just something off about it. We jumped the gate and started walking through the woods with our flashlights guiding us. There was a slight wind, nothing unusual for Scotland as it's always windy and cold. Nothing happened on our way there. We just talked and made jokes about my friend because anytime we go to an abandoned place, she gets that scared. Before she gets there, we have to go home before we reach it. We finally made it to the castle, which was just up from the park. There were construction gates all around it and a house that only had one light about 100 yards away from the castle. Now when we saw the house, I said to them we needed to be careful not to be seen, as there were security guards there, and I'd thought maybe that's where they lived. We tried to go around the right-hand side of the castle, but the trees and nettles were too high for us to climb through them. We turned around, and my friend stopped. Me and my ex looked at her, and she said, "Is that someone watching us in the window?" Now when I looked, I could only see a black shape at the bottom left of the window. It looked sort of like a person hunched right over, but again, all black. I told her it looked like a piece of furniture, my reasoning for it being that when you look into a house with a light on from the pitch black outside, you can make out some of their features like arms, clothes, maybe even facial features. But I couldn't see any of that. My ex suggested we turn our lights off and try to go around the left of the castle nearer the house. We turned them off and headed over. I got the strangest feeling ever. I honestly can't explain it, but something told me to look at the house. I turned, and when I did, I honestly wish I hadn't. I could see clearer into the house. I could see a couch at the left wall, a couch at the wall facing the window, but not only that, the black figure had moved to the right of the window. My stomach sank, and I tried so hard not to scream. I grabbed both of their arms and dragged them towards the woods we came from. We ran through the woods, and we could hear footsteps running after us. I felt so sick and ended up being sick and crying. I've never had that reaction to anything that I've found scary. A lot of unexplainable things have happened to me in the past. My ex went back to see if he could see anything, and when he came back, his face was pale white. I asked what it was, and he shook his head and told me he'd tell me in the car. We got back to the car, and I drove around the corner away from the caravan, as it just gave me bad vibes. I pulled over where there was light and civilization. He gulped and said when he went back, he looked back in the window with the light on. He could make out the couch and other details of the room perfectly, but the black figure had moved right next to the couch. And he still couldn't make out what it was, just a pitch black mass. True, unexplainable story. To start, I have terrible eyesight. I am practically blind without my glasses and do not wear contacts. I tend to lose my glasses a lot by lying them around and forgetting where I put them, so I lay them next to my sink at night to retrieve them in the morning when I brush my teeth. This experience happened to me when I was 13. I woke up around 2 a.m. to use the bathroom. My eyes were still adjusting, so when I looked around and noticed everything being so clear, I figured it was my mind playing tricks on me. After I relieved myself, I got up to wash my hands. Walking to my sink, I turned on a light and looked around. My eyesight was perfect. I was so confused at that moment I shut my eyes. I was so confused and honestly didn't want to even open my eyes. When I did, however, it was the same as before. I walked to my sink, put my glasses on, and took them right off. When I did, it was back to being blurry. I put them back on and walked back to my bed dumbfounded. Once I sat down, I don't remember anything after that. I woke up the next morning thinking that it was a dream when I went to my bathroom. I clearly remember putting my glasses next to my sink the night before, but they were nowhere to be found. I looked on the floor with no luck and decided to walk to my bed. I found them in between my bed sheets and put them on. I later told my mother, who is a believer in all sorts of weird stuff. She believed me but had no way of explaining it. I'm now 15 and have no way of explaining what happened. I know it was not a dream, it felt too real. Has this happened to anyone else? One experience that is still creepy for me was when my son was just a baby. We were living in a garage apartment at the time, so everything was really close to each other. It was a 1-bedroom, 1-bathroom apartment. There was no way anyone could get into the apartment without going up the stairs that connect to the garage. When you went up the stairs, you could see the living room area/kitchen, and the bathroom was right across from the bedroom. It was a tiny place. My husband and I had just gotten into a dispute this day. We exchanged words, and he told me he was leaving to work. At the time I was cleaning the restroom, and I saw him pass the restroom and heard his footsteps go down the stairs. While I was in the restroom, my son was on the bed asleep, but I heard him begin to cry. He was louder than usual. Not even a minute later, I heard a man's voice say "shut up" real deep and angry, and my son's cries were muffled. I got out of there quickly from the restroom, went to my room, which is only a few steps away, and saw my son lying where I left him with a pillow on his face. There's no way he could have picked up that pillow. He was still very small. Only a month or so, and there was no one there. Still creeps me out. Another time, my son and I were sitting on the floor by the bed in our room. He was probably 1 year old at this time, and his toy car, whose batteries were already likely drained, goes off on its own and starts saying only one of the phrases on it. There were like 3 phrases, I think. Anyways, it goes off and starts saying "ready set go" over and over, which was really weird because if the batteries are drained, it should go off, sound distorted maybe, or go through the other phrases. I would think. But we are sitting on the floor looking at this toy car, which is a few feet in front of us, continuously saying, "ready set go." I am weird because I really don't react to things like this until after the fact. Well, my son gets up, walks over to the toy car, and picks it up. He looks like he is handing it to someone that I obviously cannot see. After this happens, he just puts the toy back down, the car turns off, and nothing. I ended up getting out of the room and stayed in the living room after that. There are other stories from that apartment involving my son and me. I spent a lot of time there alone with him since my husband was always working and I worked the day shift, so me and my son were there at night. I spent some time living on the Navajo Nation. It's super dark out there, as there's not a ton of streetlights. The road that I was living on had one, and that was at the bend of the road for obvious reasons. A little less than a year in, I was outside smoking on the porch, and I saw what I thought was a cat moving up the road. There weren't that many people living on that road, but the house at the bend in the road did have a couple of mean dogs, and that's exactly the direction the cat was heading. I decided to intervene, so I went after it, trying to beckon it back with the traditional "here, kitty kitty," but when I got close enough, I realized it wasn't a cat at all but something that was meant to look like a cat. It was too dark to tell what it was, but I decided that I didn't want it coming to me anymore. I ran all the way back to my front door and, with a death grip on the screen door, watched it go all the way up the road, start rolling around in the dust just out of range of that one streetlight, and then an old woman with a skin over her back and head crawled out on hands and feet to squat at the end of that neighbor's drive and stare back at me. At that point, the Navajo living with me realized I was clutching the door and came to investigate why I was doing what I was doing. He looked up the road, swore, and yanked me inside. What I saw was a Skinwalker. I had been warned about them, but I dismissed them entirely as being just a bunch of crazy, naked old people in animal skins ready to jump out and say, "Ooga, booga." I was totally wrong. They are legitimately scary, and my mind was completely blown. This happened 20 years ago, and I honestly say that it was the strangest, scariest, but most fascinating thing that I have ever experienced. Very weird, unusual alternate dimension encounter story. I don't know what to make of this one, grain of salt, I guess. Location, Gadianton Canyon, Utah. Date, May 1972. Time, 11:30. 4 co-ed friends were driving on an isolated road near Modena when they reached an area where 2 sets of blacktop highway headed off into the desert. One veered sharply to the southeast, the other shooting northeast toward the canyon country. They decided to take the left road toward the canyon country. 5 minutes later, the Chevy entered a red rock canyon. One of the girls suddenly noticed that the car's headlights were shining more brightly on the pavement. Upon closer inspection, she gasped. The white centerline was gone. Instead of black asphalt, they were driving on white cement. Suddenly the highway ended abruptly at a rocky cliff face. The Chevy screeched to a stop in front of the cliff. They kept driving on the canyon road, hemmed in by red canyon walls. The canyon gradually gave way to open country. The girls gasped. Instead of moonlit desert, they saw grain fields on the right and a large lake with stands of ponderosa pine on the left. Up ahead, they spotted what appeared to be a tavern and an adjacent parking lot. It seemed to have a neon sign, but they could not read it. What should have been letters were brightly lit squiggles and curlicues. Some men came out of the building. They slowed down their vehicle, and one of the girls rolled down the window in order to ask for directions. They noticed what appeared to be consternation among the men. As if they'd been startled by some unknown animal. One of the girls stuck her head out the window and suddenly let out a terrified scream. She yelled at the driver to leave the area quickly. They looked back and saw that 4 queer-looking machines described as egg-shaped mounted on tricycle wheels were chasing them. That is, with 2 large wheels on the front and a smaller wheel in the rear. A single bright white headlight shone from the front of each pursuing machine. They made a strange whirring or buzzing sound as they rolled along. Ahead, the road led back into a red rock canyon. The road was very narrow and seemed to hem them in. They could no longer see their pursuers. Minutes later, they roared out of the canyon, back into the familiar desert. The car skidded down an arroyo and came to rest at the bottom. The girl that had stuck her head out the window was hysterical and could only describe that the men were not human. An hour later, they managed to flag down a highway patrol trooper that towed their vehicle from the area. No one could explain how the Chevy had gotten nearly 2 miles north of Highway 56 without leaving any physical trace of its passage through the rough desert terrain. Had the girl somehow gone into another dimension? Possible ghost mimicking a friend? Or a glitch in the Matrix? I was staying over at her place when this event occurred. It was almost 11 p.m. when Drew and I decided it's time to go to sleep. Now Drew was sick for the past week before this, so she wanted to change her bed sheets before we went to bed so I wouldn't catch the cold she had. I had gone in to use the bathroom while she was looking around for where she had put the sheets she had packed up a few weeks earlier. The way the hallway was set up was that her father's room was on the left and was the only room on that side of the hall, while across from it was the bathroom, and next door at the end of the hall was the guest bedroom. After walking out of the bathroom on my phone, I stood by the stairs just a little past the hallway I had just come out of. Drew walked out of her kitchen and asked me to help her find the sheets while walking down the dark hallway and into her father's pitch-black room without turning any light on along the way. I followed her down the hallway, hearing her footsteps, not even feeling a bit weird about her not turning on the lights. I could hear her rustling inside the room and heard her open the heavy closet door, which made a scraping sound on the floor. I looked back down to my phone, telling Drew about a song I had mentioned before using the restroom, but she wasn't replying. I could still hear her moving about in the dark bedroom. That's when I clued in that it was out of character for her to be in the bedroom without a light on, and ever stranger that she wasn't answering me. I called her name while looking into the bedroom. No reply. This is when my stomach dropped and I realized something was off. I turned off my phone and walked back down the hall towards the stairs and kitchen. I then heard noises coming from downstairs. I called her name once more and could hear her walking up the stairs. I met her halfway and told her I was experiencing some glitchy Matrix shit. We both walked upstairs as I filled her in on what just happened, and we stood at the top of the stairs and looked down the hallway. Drew jumped and yelled. I saw a head peek out from the doorway. Did you see that? She grabbed my arm and pulled me back, explaining that a shadowy head had popped out quickly towards the middle of the door while pointing at the guest room at the end of the dark hall. We both ran to the couch and plopped down, looking at each other with wide eyes. We eventually had to get up. We still haven't found the sheets, and Drew had to coax me into going back to the hallway so she could really look in her father's room. We both peered down the hall when she spoke up again. Wait, isn't the guest room door closed? How could a head peek out at us? We turned on all the lights and walked into her father's room. Guess where the sheets were? In the closet, but the door was closed, unlike what I heard before. I just want to know what or who had lured me into the dark hallway and towards the dark room alone while it mimicked my friend and her voice. Is this paranormal? A possible glitch? Why had this even happened in the first place? And most importantly, how had I clearly heard the closet door open out of all things, when in reality it was closed, and that is where the sheets had been? Any advice or possible explanations would be a great help in easing mine and Drew's minds. Thank you. Unexplainable experience. 3 summers ago I had some friends over my house while my parents were away, and we were watching some scary movies. I thought of the genius idea to ghost hunt, so we turned off all the lights in my house and took some pictures and audio recordings while asking for the ghost to give us some signs. We didn't capture anything really, but after the night of hanging out was over, my friend Jay decided to stay the night. So we were in bed laying with each other's feet beside the other's head. How do guys always sleep when they have to share a bed? We spent the night just talking about girls and stuff like that, when all of a sudden Jay stops me and says, "Wait, it's about to be 3 in the morning, let's shut up and see if we hear anything." I watch my clock, and as soon as 3 hits, there's that cracking sound houses make when they settle or whatever. Jay jumps, and next thing I know, he's lying right next to me. Then we hear it, tap dot tap. It sounded like a finger knocking from inside my closet door. We were shocked. Not too long after that night, I was laying in bed alone reading some scary stories when I noticed it's about to hit 3 in the morning. I turn off my phone and lay in my bed trying to go to sleep when I hear that house cracking sound in the upper left corner of my bedroom. Another cracking sound follows, this time from the upper right corner of my room. A third crack follows, but this one seemed to have come out of thin air, right above my bed. Suddenly, my body goes stiff, my legs straighten, and my arms cross like I'm posed in a sarcophagus. My eyes shut tight, and I start violently shaking in my bed. It felt like something came over me. I couldn't control my body, but I was completely conscious. All I could remember thinking about was how scared I was. This lasted for about 10 seconds, but it felt like forever. Soon after I stop shaking, I feel the same feeling come over me, and my body begins to go stiff again, but this time I'm able to fight it off. I then immediately fell asleep. I have no idea how to explain what happened to me that night. Any insight would be appreciated. Unexplained footsteps. Has anyone else had a similar experience? I live in a small city in PA. My neighborhood is pretty quiet. Every day after my homework was done, I would go to hang out with my best friend. She only lived a block and a half away, and it was across the street from my elementary school. I was about 11 at the time, and I remember it was one of the first days that felt like fall, so probably early October, if I had to guess. This type of weather is my favorite, and I remember being eager to get together to play kickball or just walk with my friend through the crunchy leaves and breathe in the nice, crisp air. As I said, we spent time together every day, so the 1.5 block route to her house was extremely familiar to me. I was a child of habit, and I would hop over the same cracks, cross the street in the same spot, etc. This day, I called her to meet me at the corner as I typically would. I run early and she runs late, So the majority of the time this meant that I would just wait for her on her porch until she was finally ready. I never needed to knock on her door, I would just sit on her railing and wait for her. I was usually amused by the idea of her walking out of her house, and I would just be there. Anyway, this particular day, when I made it to the corner of her block, I started to hear footsteps behind me. I looked behind me, but no one was there. I remember looking around, and there was absolutely no one in sight. I realized when I stopped walking, the footstep sound stopped. Considering how close they sounded and how in sync they were to mine, I assumed that they were my footsteps echoing. I thought it was weird because I never heard my footsteps echo before, and I felt that this was something I would have previously noticed, considering I always took the same route. I started playing with the echo. I would stomp my foot, I would hear a foot stomp. I would walk normally, and the echo would walk frequently. I stopped again to look behind me. I remember only seeing leaves blowing around behind me. At this point, even though I felt I had an explanation, I was genuinely creeped out. I took maybe 10 more steps where the echo was in sync with my footsteps before they began to speed up. The footsteps sounded like they were chasing me. Of course, at this point, I booked IT for my friend's porch. I swear on everything. As soon as my foot hit the first step leading up to her porch, the footsteps stopped. I ran to her door and started knocking, which startled her and her mom because I typically didn't knock at her door. I was looking around, and there was still no one around. All of this happened in a matter of half a block. We spent our day just walking around our neighborhood because I thought maybe we would find another group of kids out and about who could have been messing with me. Even so, those footsteps sounded like they were right behind me the whole time, and I am not sure how that would even be replicated. I am 23 now, and there are times my friend and I will meet up at the same corner. If she is ever running late, there are times I try to emulate the echoing footsteps, even though, if I'm being honest, I don't want to hear them again. I told my parents, and they thought I was just being imaginative, but my friend and her mom believed me, only because I was so scared when knocking at her door. I pulled my pickup deep into a little canyon near the Berlin ghost town in Nevada to find a sandy spot to camp one late afternoon and came across a little stone cabin, about 12x12 interior dimensions, with an open door and window. I thought, hey, cool. Won't have to pitch a tent tonight. As I hopped out to poke my head inside to check for ants, snakes, and see. The moment I crossed the threshold, I got a feeling of deep black anger and resentment so hard it was like getting slapped in the face. I had been really upbeat a second before, but that feeling scared me so much that I hopped back in my truck and drove 30 miles before I felt okay enough to look for a campsite again. Something had told me in no uncertain terms I was not welcome in that cabin. I slipped into another dimension. When I was 17, my closest friend was troubled at home. My family opted to take him in and put him through his senior year of high school. They moved him in the summer before, which is where all this begins. I was helping my friend, let's call him Jay, carry his duffel bags to the bedroom. The hallway was 20 feet long and ended in a junction with the doors to 3 bedrooms. My room was on the left side, and his was in the center of the 3. While he was unpacking and we were talking and catching up, there was a lapse in conversation in which I decided to grab something from my room. After exiting the room and turning to walk into mine, I remembered that I forgot to ask him something. So I stopped in my tracks, put my hand on the doorframe, turned my head, raised my voice, and asked. No reply. I turned around and asked him again as I walked around the corner, but he was gone. Now me and Jay occasionally would screw with each other and hide behind this and that to scare each other. But this was different. The light was different. Everything had a haze to it, a blue muted haze. It felt cold, but not in a physical way. I called his name as I searched that room relentlessly but turned up nothing. I started searching the entire house from top to bottom, every closet, cranny, and nook. Nothing. My folks were out getting groceries and weren't coming back for at least another hour. The funny thing about this house is that somehow it's pressurized. Whenever an exterior door is opened, you can hear the frame creak and pop from anywhere in the house. As I make my way through this hazy, muted resemblance of my home, I stop yelling and freaking the duck out long enough to remember that. I rule out the garage and such, walk back to his room, and stop to think. I walk out of the room and decide to start changing things. I close doors after I thoroughly search the rooms, I pick things up and leave them in the middle of the floor, and lastly, I turn on a table lamp in the living room that was on the other end of the hallway to the bedrooms. As I stood there thinking about what else to do, I saw Jay walking out of the hallway wide-eyed and pale, staring with his mouth slightly open. We exchanged our fair share of questions and what the ducks? Which ended up with us recounting and reenacting our exact timeline itinerary. Which placed us walking through each other at least 7 times. The icing on the cake. He went outside. He heard the house creak, and I didn't. I had no idea where I was, but it certainly wasn't here. I scoured the web and watched countless goofy paranormal documentaries, but the only story I ever saw that sounded close was that of an Indian girl who had it happen to her when she was upstairs. She said she was getting ready for a party when suddenly the laughter and talking from her family below fell silent. She describes the exact same muted environment and lack of other people, except she stated that she saw Ganesh. Needless to say, I'm pretty turned about as to my whereabouts. I'm really hoping for at least one that can corroborate a similar experience. Dark entity and other phenomena at my parents' house. My sister and I are somewhat sensitive to the spiritual world. I have many stories I could tell you. But I'll begin with some recent experiences that have us thoroughly freaked out. A little bit of background on where my parents live. It's the foothills of Appalachia, and the previous owner of this land was splitting their property and selling each section. My parents were told about how the previous owner had always heard non-English speakers coming from outside in the middle of the night. My parents have had the same experience. My sister, my mom, and I have heard babies crying when my children are either asleep or not here. I saw a spirit on the side of the road at the very edge of my parents' property when I was driving home. Now on to the main event. My parents had this house built in 2015, but they had the contractor leave the upstairs unfinished. My dad put in everything that is currently up there. I used to hang out in the unfinished area when I needed time to myself. But after it was finished, I started to get this dark feeling around the stairs. It felt like something was angry and following me around. I'm a visual thinker, and I kept seeing/thinking that something angry was about to round the corner at the stairs and chase me down. Even though I was 16 to 17 at the time, I eventually refused to sleep upstairs until I moved out at 18 to 19. My sister gets an uneasy feeling the same way. I hadn't thought about it in years. But now my son, 3, is telling me there is an angry monster following us around on the stairs. A couple nights ago, I put up a protective sign above the bedroom door. The thing isn't gone, but it doesn't seem to be able to get into the bedroom anymore. My son has stopped screaming when I turn out the bedroom light and doesn't wake up in the night like he had been. But last night he told me the monster was trying to get in. To say I was freaked out is an understatement. Multiverse phenomenon? I'm not exactly sure if I'll be able to explain this correctly. And I'm not even sure if it's something that's even worth sharing or talking about. But with how I felt this morning when I woke up, I just feel like getting it out of my chest. A couple of weeks ago, I had this dream, or experience if you would. I felt like a ghost, drifting through a world that wasn't my own. When I was looking around, I didn't recognize anything that might give me any sort of hint of where I might be. It wasn't until my mom and sister walked into the room I was in. They didn't notice me or couldn't see or hear me. And the strange thing is, they looked a bit different than what my mom and sister looked like. But I knew, in my heart, that they were who I thought they were. Then that's where I walked into the room. The other me, that is. Him I recognized, he looked like me in every way. They were talking and laughing, like any other normal family would. Meanwhile, I was just staring, watching silently. Some time had passed, and my other self and sister were home. My mother had gone out to run an errand. My sister's phone rang, and she answered. She looked at my other self with tears in her eyes after a while. And my other self grew worried and frustrated. Repeatedly asking what was wrong till he took the phone himself. Then time seemed to skip, and I was dragged to a hospital room. I saw my other self and sister crying, holding onto my mother's hand. She had died. Time skipped once again, my other self locked away in what looked like an apartment. I'm not entirely sure how long had passed, but he no longer looked like me. The look in his eyes was almost as if he were soulless. As if he had given up on living. His hair was long and ragged, unkempt. That whole time, I could feel how I guessed he was feeling. No longer wanting to live, but not having the courage to end it. He missed his mom dearly, just like I would if it had happened to me. He wanted to die. He cried every day, and his heart ached so much. It was a terrible feeling. So cold. Just remembering it and typing this at the moment is bringing me to tears. Time skipped once again. My other self looked older by about a few years. There was a pep in his step now, but he looked focused. I'm not exactly sure where we were. It looked like a room inside a large facility of sorts. A bunch of equipment everywhere. He was mumbling to himself a lot. Thought I couldn't understand. He had created some sort of portal of sorts, the size of a door. When he flipped a few switches and slammed down on a button with the palm of his hand, the portal came to life. A dark blue in color, radiant, lighting up the entire room in its hue. In that moment, my other self felt a sense of hope. He was happy and hopeful for once after so many years. He hesitated, but he stepped through slowly. Then here was the strange part, I felt like he and I seemed to peer into each other's memories. I knew I was sleeping, I knew I was dreaming. But it felt like I was communicating in some way, with something, someone. I couldn't wake up. Though the communication was more one-sided. I felt like someone or something was going through my memories and my dreams. Most of them are with my mother and me. In my dream, I began to cry. Happy tears, sad tears. I can't explain it, and I'm sorry if I'm not doing it any justice. Then, the rapid flash of dreams and images stopped. And we began, talking, in a way. I can't explain it. It was dark, I couldn't see him, and he couldn't see me. But we knew we're there, and we knew we could both hear each other. Is it possible to accept someone else, a multiversal self, into you? My other self, he told me, didn't want to live anymore. He didn't want to live a life without his mom. At least one who was taken from him too soon. He wanted to die, but he couldn't pull the trigger. For the rest of his life, he worked on something that could take him outside of his world, and into another so he could be reunited with his mom. And it worked. He did it. Though he couldn't choose where to go. Things were silent for what felt like a long while, then all he said was for me not to worry, all this would feel like a dream. I woke up from my long sleep. My eyes burned, my cheeks were wet with tears, and my pillow was also wet from what I guessed were tears as they rolled off my cheek. I was extremely confused. I dried my cheeks and eyes off, and I got up off of bed to stare myself in the mirror to make sure I was still me, as strange as that may sound. And I was. I brushed the dream aside and stepped out to the kitchen to drink some water. I was extremely thirsty. Then my mom walked in and said good morning nonchalantly. I turned to stare and say it back at her, when my words just froze. I was on the verge of tears again, and I felt this great sense of joy in my heart. As if a deep, dark hole were filled. As if I had regained something I lost so long ago. I quickly turned away to avoid any embarrassment and dried my eyes up. The whole time thinking what the hell was wrong with me. It's my mom, I just saw her last night, and I'm over here getting emotional. Once I regained my composure, I wished her a good morning as well. Then something seemed to take over, and I gave her a long hug. She laughed and asked what that was about. I'm not much of a hugger, which was odd to both her and me. I was confused too. I just shrugged and played it off. Thanks for listening. I'm still not entirely sure what's going on. I feel like I'm back to my old self now. But I can't shake this feeling that there's even a small part of someone else inside of me. Maybe I'm just overthinking this. Maybe it was all just a dream, and I'm letting it affect me too much. But I figured writing this out will help me move on. If you'd like, share your own experiences with me. If you had any similar ones or anything like that. Would help me feel less crazy, in all honesty. I hope you have a great day, and take care. Ghost trying to wake me up? Once in a great while my bed shakes so subtle, but enough to wake me up when I am sleeping. It happened twice and may possibly happen again? The area I live in, upstate New York, is not prone to earthquakes. I'm a 21-year-old male, and I live with my mom. One day I woke up to someone or something shaking my bed. It felt like someone was shaking my bed, trying to wake me up. I thought it was my mother trying to wake me up, but when I woke up, it was like early in the morning. 3 a.m. to 4 a.m. I woke up to darkness. Nothing there, but my bed was still lightly shaking. Nothing in my room, not even my bottles of water, was moving. Just my bed, subtle shakes. But it's vibrating enough to wake me up. It happened twice. The last time it happened was this summer of 2023. I wasn't sweating because I sleep with the fan on high all year round. So I couldn't have just randomly awakened due to me being hot in the middle of the night. There is no natural explanation that I can think of or find on the internet that helps. I can't be dreaming it because when I awaken, my bed is still shaking. It's not sleep paralysis, because I can move freely. I stand up and feel my bed, and it vibrates back and forth as if someone is rubbing my shoulder trying to awaken me. I have no pets. When this happens, I just go back to sleep when I can't figure out what the cause is. Does this strange phenomenon happen to anyone else? Is there an explanation for it? Or is the phenomenon not something that naturally occurs in our dimension? I'm not a firm believer in the paranormal. I fell asleep in the living room back in the day with an antenna on the TV, so it was just a bit of fuzz coming through the sound. Not the most relevant, but it definitely adds to the mood. I woke up in the dark morning at around 2:30 a.m. with the TV now off. I sleepily got up, stretched, and wandered over to the other side of the room to turn on the small lamp that wouldn't blind me in the midnight darkness. It took around a minute to get up, stretch, and turn on the light. I turn around, and I see the dark figure of my sister standing in the frame of the doorway leading to the kitchen. At first I thought it was simply a trick of the darkness, making me see shapes that weren't there. My heart was pounding considering I didn't expect to see her there and staring at me. I froze cold for around half a minute, but she was definitely there. I even moved my head a little to the side to see if it was the shape of some objects behind her, but she was there. She was in a weird, crooked pose as well, like she was trying to mimic a spider. Slightly hunched over with her hands at odd angles into the air above her. We scared each other quite often, and she was ducking winning this one. I said her name, and I could see her outline tilting her head to the side, but she continued to stand silently. I asked her to knock it off. She absolutely had gotten me, but she didn't say anything. Just subtly moved her limbs and crouched maybe a little lower. I was waiting for her to jump out and scream to scare me or something, and I wanted her to do so just to end my own quiet terror, but she didn't. She just waited and waited. I think another minute must have passed that felt like an age, as I was just anticipating the moment she'd make me jump. As she was just being as creepy as she could, I decided I needed to turn on the light switch to make her finally jump at me and get the scare over with. The light switch to the kitchen was next to her, and the light switch to the living room was quite far, which would also mean walking away from her, which freaked me out as I couldn't deal with her running at me in the dark, so I went for the light switch in the kitchen. As I walked towards her, now several minutes after waking up, I could see her outline slowly turn her head to look at me, and I was able to make out more of the depth of her turning her from a 2D to 3D silhouette in the dark. I had to reach past her to turn on the lights, and I could see her next to me, features now just a little more visible and ready to scream as soon as I turned them on. I could see her face less than half a meter from me, ready to scare the living daylights out of me. I flicked on the lights. There was no one there. Just an empty space where the figure was. My sister was and had been fast asleep upstairs for hours. I look back nowadays, this was over 10 years ago, and all I can think of is that I was somehow still dreaming that I hadn't woken up after minutes of standing up, stretching, and walking. I've never done that before or since, and it doesn't make sense to me either, but it's the only explanation. I sometimes think it might have just been that phenomenon where your brain makes up shapes in the dark, but the outline and depth were consistent and became more visible as I got closer. I don't believe in ghosts, but that made me consider it for a moment. I hope ghosts don't look like that. Unexplainable Halloween night for me and my siblings. It all happened about 13 years ago. I was about 14 years old, and I will always remember that late evening. A bit of context first. We are 8 siblings, 4 girls, 4 boys, raised only by mom. Dad walked out on us a few years prior to the event I am about to tell. We grew up quite modest. Mom was the only breadwinner, we didn't have a lot, and we were living in a rental that was just a bathroom, a small hallway, a living room that doubled as a bedroom for the girls and mom, and a kitchen that also doubled as a bedroom for the boys. Anyway, we were a content Christian family. It was the 31st of October, and we were only 7 at home. My oldest sister was out and mom was at work. Me being the second one, I was in charge. It was about 7 p.m., and we were all in the living room minding our business. Some of us were playing with some toys, I was painting, and a few were watching TV, and it was quite peaceful, just waiting for mom to come home. Suddenly my younger brother said, "Hey guys, do you hear that?" We turned the TV volume down and listened. From across the hallway that was connecting the 2 main rooms, we could all clearly hear a repetitive, high-pitched banging. It was just as if someone was repeatedly hitting a spoon on a cup. We all stood frozen. It went on for a few minutes, and then we stopped. All bundled up together, we slowly crept out of the kitchen. On the table there was some stuff, like the bread, butter, and a jar with a spoon in it. We just ate and we didn't put stuff away. We got close and tried to mix the jam with the spoon, and surely enough, it was the same sound. At this point, we didn't know what the deal was, and we were really creeped out. The sound we heard couldn't have been produced by something like the wind or other exterior forces. It was very deliberate, and it went on for a few minutes, so not just a spoon falling off or something like that. We put the things away, and we went back to the living room. That is when the horror really started. I kid you not, around the whole house there were unexplainable bangings. We could hear footsteps in the hallway, above us from the attic, and around us from the walls. We all started crying and got in bed, all bundled up, praying. It all went like this for a few minutes, and suddenly, we heard the house door open. It was Mom, she just came back from work. And it all stopped. Needless to say, we all jumped on her, hugging her and crying. We told her what happened, and she was shocked. We never had an experience like that, and when we get together, we sometimes talk about it. It was one of the most scary things that ever happened to us. We all heard the same thing. We didn't see anything, but the sounds were real. We think it might have been something like a demonic attack that wanted to create fear in us on one of the darkest nights of the year. Did any of you ever experience something like this? Shipley Hollow screams. In southern Tennessee, close to Chattanooga, there is a road called Shipley Hollow Road. Going into my story, I did not know about the legend of Pity Pat or the history of Shipley Hollow. If you haven't heard of Pity Pat or are familiar with the area, internet has some good information on the legend. I was dating someone who lived close by at the time, and we had decided we wanted to go ghost hunting one night. He brought this up because there is a graveyard, and it was in the middle of nowhere. As soon as we had discussed going to Shipley Hollow, my dog started acting strange. Growling at the doorway when no one was there, pacing, and whining. I, of course, already had an uneasy feeling about this place. We got in my car and started the 30-minute drive to the graveyard. The whole drive there, I felt very uncomfortable. Like someone was watching us. Almost a sense of dread. We turned on an old road and began our drive up Shipley Hollow Road. About halfway up the road is a bridge that goes over a stream. I stopped the car so we could get out and look at the water, and the cousin said he wanted to get in. The bridge was probably 10 to 15 feet from the stream, so it would have been a bit of a hike down. I automatically said no and asked him to get back in the car. He didn't respond, and my boyfriend had to literally drag him back to the car. It was like he was hypnotized or something. So we get to the graveyard, and I park the car. The graveyard, from what I remember since it was at least 10 years ago, was a gravel road that went through tees to an opening. The road looped around right through the graveyard so that when we got out, there were graves on both sides of us. I turned the car off, flicked off the lights, and the three of us got out of the car. We were talking and looking at the graves using a flashlight when all of a sudden we hear a blood-curdling scream. It was one of those moments where you feel as though you imagine it because of how cliché it would be. Jacob continued to talk, and I heard it again. It was faint, like it was far off in the woods. I yelled at him to stop talking, and that's when we heard it for the third time. But this time it sounded much closer. The screams were terrifying. It sounded like a woman screaming bloody murder, and the screams lasted maybe 3 to 4 seconds. All three of us ran back to the car, flipped the lights on, and sped to get out of there. After that, weird things started happening. I'd wake up feeling like someone was staring at me from a corner in my boyfriend's bedroom. We'd hear voices when we were the only ones at his house. Cabinets and doors would open by themselves. A shampoo bottle flew across the bathroom when I was showering one morning. This was a new house in a new neighborhood as well. It got so bad that his parents hired paranormal investigators to come in and check out their house. We broke up shortly after, and they ended up moving houses. I haven't noticed anything since leaving the house, but I was wondering if anyone else had ever visited Shipley Hollow or had something follow them home from somewhere. Side note, after this night, we researched the area. We found out that a few people have drowned in that stream, and many people have felt as though the stream was calling to them. This really creeped me out when thinking about how the cousin acted at the bridge. I am a truck driver from the USA in my late 20s. I believe in the paranormal and higher powers that be and all that, but have very few first-hand experiences. The following are 2 times in which the unexplained either helped me out or possibly saved me from any number of scenarios. In January of 2014, that frozen January, a fellow Marine and I were headed from Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, to Indiana for my upcoming wedding. M, as I will call him, and I had a pretty rough trip. To spare some space, the short version is that M has never seen snow, and because of this, we almost crashed only an hour outside of base. M, paying for the gas on the trip, lost his wallet. This is a factor later, and we almost rear-ended a 53-foot trailer that was just sitting in the middle of a frozen minor state highway. Anyway, because M had lost his wallet by the time we reached Indianapolis, we were in desperate need of gas, and it was negative 17 degrees out, not counting wind chill. Growing up around quote-unquote old-school truckers, I was hoping I could make it to a truck stop and get just enough money for gas to get us to our destination. I-65 being shut down, we had to take some alternative routes and wound up on a long, dark stretch of highway and somehow came across a truck stop. Nothing noteworthy, but the lights were on, and there was even a truck parked. I will always remember this truck. It was a solid black classic square-nose Peterbilt with those huge barrel stacks all chromed out, and the trailer was all matching but no company markers. Not totally odd, but not the norm either. I went inside, and luckily the driver was having a cup of coffee. M was passed out in the car at this point, so no luck supporting this, dang. I politely asked if I could bother him a moment, trying my best not to sound like those scam artist panhandlers. He said it was fine and asked if I wanted a cup of coffee. I really did and needed it for the next 2-hour-plus drive in the snowstorm after having driven all night. I explained to this guy our situation and told him that since 65 was shut down I could bring the money back to him before he would be able to leave, seeing as I had an emergency bank account at home and didn't have a card to it so I could burn up the money. I was still an immature young 20s Marine with an ego at the time. He said sure, gave me some cash, and ordered 2 to-go cups of coffee for me and M. Later that morning I came back to pay this man back and thank him again, but the truck stop was boarded up like it hadn't been in use for years. There was no truck, not even tracks in the snow. The only tracks were from my car, where I had parked early that morning, and the now present cop car. I asked this officer about the place, and this was his reply. Let me guess, the trucker had a big, solid black truck. Yes, sir. And it was about 3 a.m.? Thinking I replied with another yes. Kiddo, you met your guardian angel. He only helps those who really need it and have good intentions. We call him the Ghost of 3. Pretty bewildered, I asked why the Ghost of 3. Because it's always at 3 a.m., this is Route 3, and the help is always in some sort of 3. How much did he give you? The officer nodded to the money in my hand. 30. The second. I have been a trucker for about a year now and should note that I have a heavy influence of Cherokee and Navajo on my dad's side. That will make sense in a moment. I was traveling down I-44 in Missouri, just before Big Cabin, a big Native American tourist attraction. There are all kinds of stories about Indian graves and ghost tales and voices around that area, just nothing I've ever gotten to experience. So, I had plenty of time to spare for the day, so I was just cruising right along listening to some stories from Let's Read when I noticed a car on the shoulder with a woman gesturing like she needed help. You know, both arms waving as a vehicle approaches. Now, I have CB in my truck. For those who don't know, it's an older form of radio communication that was created for similar intent as cell phones for anybody traveling in a vehicle. I had actually forgotten to turn mine back on when I started my day. Well, as I started to slow my truck, I heard a clear voice come across my CB saying, "Don't stop, driver." Oblivious to my CB not being on, I didn't think too much about it but decided to pull over in front of the car, not behind it. Then I headed again, but more aggressive. "Don't stop, just keep driving." As I passed the car, I saw my reason to hit the accelerator and get out of Dodge. In front of the car, a man was crouched down near the passenger side with a gun and was glaring as I passed and kept driving. Guardian angels, ghost, unexplained. Whatever you call it, thank any form of higher power for the trucker at 3 a.m. and the voice that called out over my CB, that was off. Among other PSI experiences, ghosts at Gettysburg. I was there in 1963, and it was Easter, almost exactly 100 years since the battle. I was sick of being stuck in the car with my brothers, and when we stopped there, I went one way and the rest of the family another. I clearly remember stepping through a bit of parking lot, over a low barrier, across some grass and to a row of trees. The trees were big and old, and then I noticed the bullet hole scars in the trees, scores of them. I put my hand up to touch the bullet scars, and instantly, the day turned from bright and clear to foggy, with smoke in the air. I could smell the gun smoke, like after fireworks. I heard running, yelling, booms and rifle cracks, gear rattling, and saw figures in the mist/smoke running around. I blink once, then again, and the scene is the same. It lasted close to a full minute, long enough for me to really take it in and realize it was real. When the scene returned to normal, I staggered back to the car, stunned. Never told anyone for years. I realized years later that it stopped when I took my hand off the tree. I've often thought of returning to Gettysburg and trying to find that same tree again, but it's been 60 years. Pretty sure we have a child ghost in the house. Unsolved mysteries. I'm not really a believer in ghosts, but I'll be honest, I'm not interested in putting in the mental effort to explain this one, and it's an easy way to write it off. Context before we start: married couple, mid-30s, no kids or animals, rarely have people over because we work weird hours. A few weeks ago, we randomly found horse stickers in the middle of the living room floor. Like, the super thick scratch and sniff ones you'd buy at a dollar store for a little girl who adores horses. We don't have kids, we don't have guests over often, and we haven't bought any stickers for our friends' kids. Whatever, chalked it up as weird and tossed them. A week later, the same pack of stickers shows up in the same spot. Threw them out again. This time it was on the night before trash day, so they went right into the bin at the curb. A week later, the same pack shows up in the same spot again, and this time we just tossed it into the junk drawer. 2 days later I went to grab some batteries, and it was gone. I asked my wife if she'd done anything with them, and she said no. Haven't seen them since. A week after that, we bought a handmade Christmas ornament that looked like our late dog. Hang it up on the handle of a kitchen cabinet we never use. We're sitting on the couch that night watching a movie, and I hear a slam in the kitchen, so I get up to investigate. The cabinet door is wide open, and the ornament is torn off its string and sitting on the floor. Again, we were both on the couch at the time it happened, and we live alone. The next night, my wife uses the downstairs bathroom while I'm cooking dinner. She comes into the kitchen to wash her hands, and afterwards we're standing there having a conversation. Maybe 30 seconds into it we hear water start running in the bathroom. She asks if this is the first time the toilet has started randomly filling the commode, an issue we've had in previous places, so our first assumption at the source of the sound, and I said I hadn't noticed it before. She goes into the bathroom to check it out, and the sink is running. We know she hadn't forgotten to turn the tap off after washing her hands, because we're out of soap in there, so she had used the kitchen sink to wash her hands. Nevertheless, the tap was all the way open. She goes, "Do we have a ghost?" And I thought about it for a second and said, well, based on the stickers, the ornament, and now the water, I guess it would have to be the ghost of a little kid just messing around. She asked if we should get the house checked out, and I told her no, because, 1, this is all pretty tame and probably understandable if I put forth the mental effort to figure out the stickers, and, 2, I could handle it myself. So I shouted, "Listen up, ghost, if you're here to stay, that's cool, as long as you're here to party, we can party. But don't duck with my water bills or break my shit anymore, that ain't cool. You can hang out, but don't be duckin' rude." I promise I actually, half ironically, said that, and this isn't poor fanfiction, I really am just that uncool IRL. Since then it's pretty much stopped, but sometimes when someone drives by with loud music blasting, the kitchen breaker will throw a couple times and then stay off. That's probably easily explained by the 50-year-old breaker in the garage getting ready to go, but if this is all a ghost, then at least it listened to me and is now having a rave instead of breaking things. If it's actually the breaker, I have a promotion coming up, and we're planning on using the additional income to upgrade to 200A service, so that'll be resolved soon anyways. It's annoying having to reset the clocks on the oven and microwave, I'll admit. Anyway, that's my set of unexplained phenomena. Speculate as you will, roast me for how I address the ghost, and do whatever you're going to do. In 2008, a group of friends and I decided to drive from Las Vegas to Area 51. We took the extraterrestrial highway and stopped at the black mailbox. We even went to the gate where the do not enter signs were. We arrived at the gate around 1 to 2 a.m., but I can't recall the exact time. As soon as we got out of the vehicle to stretch, a spotlight from the other side of the gate illuminated us. It was clear that this was security, and they didn't want us there. We quickly got back into the vehicle and turned around. While driving back on the desert road toward the extraterrestrial highway, about 15 minutes later, we all noticed a bright light on the ground in the direction of Rachel, Nevada. At first, we thought it might be a car waiting for us, possibly the sheriff ready to pull us over. We kept driving and got closer, about 50 yards away from the light, only to realize that we were still in the desert and nowhere near the extraterrestrial highway. Suddenly, the bright light or orb swiftly zoomed away, like a drag racing vehicle or a funny car, and disappeared, if you're familiar with the term. We were all both frightened and amazed by what we had witnessed. There was no sound at all, we only heard our vehicle, there was also no dust plume from the orb. I'll never forget this experience, this event jump-started my journey into the unknown. I am thinking of going back and camping out for one night. I am trying to wrangle up the same crew, but we're all so busy with life. It's clear that there is something unusual or otherworldly present with us. Unexplained occurrences in my old house. Within my first week living at my mom's new house, little things here and there would happen. For instance, from our bathroom, you could see into 2 other bedrooms with a wall in between. When I stood at the sink to brush my teeth, I'd always see a dark figure against the wall, even when the light was on. Things would be out of place when I knew I left them in a certain place. Pretty harmless things, so one night I jokingly said to my mom that I thought there was a ghost in the house. She looked at me dead serious and said, "I was afraid you'd say that." It turns out in the month before I moved in, she too had been noticing things were off. Again, though everything was relatively harmless up to this point, I never felt unsafe. A few months went by, and we had just ignored things, like hearing noises coming from the attic, things being moved, etc., thinking it was maybe my deceased grandmother. I had a friend over, and we were in my room when I told her I had a ghost. She laughed as did I, and she didn't believe me. So I thought we'd test it. I said something like, "If you're a boy, shut my door, if you're a girl, do something else." We laughed about it for hours and slept downstairs. Now the next day is when it gets interesting. My friend went home, never going back upstairs without me, and my mom and I went up to clean out my closet. I was making my bed, which was on the opposite side of the room, when she yelled at me for writing on the wall. I swore up and down that I didn't, so I walked over to the closet, and sure enough, on the bottom step, it plainly said girl in what looked like a child's handwriting. The marker was still on the step with the cap off, and everything else that had been on it was now on the floor. We both screamed and ran downstairs, and I called my friend, who also swore up and down she hadn't been anywhere near my closet at any point in her stay. We brushed it off, thinking, hey, it must be a little girl, and maybe she's just lonely. One night I had been over at a friend's house, and when I came home, my mom was sleeping on the couch downstairs. I asked her what had happened, and she told me that in the middle of the night she heard things being moved in my room as if I were in there moving things around. It couldn't have been the cats because they were sleeping at her feet, and she was wide awake when it happened as she was reading her Bible. She went into my room and sat there for a few minutes, nothing happened, so again we thought it was a little girl that was just lonely. I've never been big into religion, but I had asked my mom if we could hang rosary beads on my closet door to see if maybe it helped. I had been having terrible nightmares about the closet and there being some evil in it. She agreed and sprinkled holy water around the room as well. For the first time in months, I slept like a baby. I got up for school and realized my rosary beads weren't on the door anymore. They were on the floor and had been taken apart link by link directly in front of my closet. Most of you will think, oh, the cats did it. I could understand that if a few links were broken, but every single link had been taken apart and was in front of the door in a perfect pile. From that night on, I never slept in my room. I would sleep in my mom's room. I made her leave the bathroom light on every single night because I swore I saw the dark figure in her doorway at night when it was off. It got so bad I made her shut the door some nights. Now jumping ahead to summertime, our house was extremely hot and we didn't have air conditioning. So we relied on the ventilation from the windows and doors being opened and the lights being off, something I hated with a passion. I would lay down around 10-ish, as did my mom, and I'd text for a few hours before I went to sleep. I didn't have internet on my phone. I still had one of those old flip phones. One night I was laying there, and the cats were laying between my mom and me as they usually did, and something grabbed my leg and shook it. I was terrified. I stayed in a fetal position under the hot blanket until the sun came up. I told my mom about it the next morning, and she let me keep the light on again at night. I have no reasonable explanation for that happening. It wasn't my imagination, and it certainly wasn't a cat. Something or someone grabbed my foot and shook it. From this point on, though, I slept downstairs on the couch. Around this time I also transferred to an online school, so I began staying up all night sitting in the kitchen with the lights on and sleeping through the day. I took everything out of my closet, and I kept the door to my room closed as often as I could so I didn't see anything. The door would open all on its own, but this, I think, may have been due to some sort of draft causing it to do that. I have no proof of that though, which is why I mentioned it. My once loving, cuddly cat became vicious as hell, and he'd constantly attack me. I even had to go to the hospital at one point because my hand had swelled so badly from him biting me. This cat was loved and spoiled all his life. We have no idea what caused him to lash out so badly, especially to me. Finally, my mom had had enough. She called her friend, who did some sort of Native American blessing on my room while I was out. She gave me 2 dream catchers to hang around my room, and since that day I hadn't had anything bad happen at that house. I felt safe in my home again and could sleep through the night. I never saw the black figure in the corner of my eye, and everything just stopped. I don't know why this happened to me, or even if it was totally paranormal. I wanted to get others' feedback on what it could have been / why I was specifically targeted. Thank you for those who stuck around, and I look forward to hearing everyone's theories. I will never forget this strange experience as long as I live. I was sitting at a traffic light in the bad part of town in Los Angeles. I stared at the traffic light. I saw what looked like a single water droplet in the center of a body of water. The ripple started at the center of the road and grew outward. I looked around to see if anyone else was seeing this. No one was around me. After the ripple stopped, I noticed the light had changed in size and color. The top light was very large, about 5 times the regular size. The other 2 lights were smaller than the top light. The light turned bright blue at the top. I was in shacks and confused, so I waited to see what other colors the light had. The middle turned bright orange, then the smaller light on the bottle turned pink. I heard what sounded like rigging wind. I was startled by the noise and looked around frantically. Everything had changed back. I was still myself. I sat for a moment, scratching my head in confusion. I've never understood what happened. What do you think? Maybe a time slip? Different dimension? I don't know. Several years ago, I flew out to Michigan to visit my father and his significant other. The second day that we were there, my father broke out all the old photographs as we all sat around the table reminiscing. There were lots of tears and laughter, and he even brought out some letters I had written to my grandmother as a teenager when we were stationed overseas. That night I was having some trouble getting to sleep, and I just kept thinking about all the wonderful memories that we had reviewed earlier in the day. I finally fell asleep, but was awakened by a bright light shining through my closed eyelids. I remember thinking, who the hell turned on the bedroom light in the middle of the night? As I opened my eyes, the room was lit up in a brilliant shimmering gold from ceiling to floor. It was somewhat transparent, as I could see the wallpaper pattern through it. It was incredibly bright, yet my eyes didn't water. I didn't reel away from the light nor cover my eyes. I sat up in bed and felt this wonderful peacefulness, warmth, and feeling of love surround me. I was amazed. I had no fear, and I did not attempt to wake my sister to make this golden glow last as long as possible. Then slowly it started to fade, and the room became enveloped in darkness again. I remained sitting up in bed in case the gold returned, but it did not. The next morning, I shared my story with the family and my sister, and I decided that we would try to stay up late in case it happened again and we could both experience it. Bedtime came, and we spoke quietly deep into the night, trying to stay awake, and then I slowly started to doze off. Next thing I know, my sister is softly calling my name and telling me to wake up and look at the wall. There were 2 circular orbs, translucent in the center and glowing white. The first one was about the size of a soccer ball, and the second one was a little bit smaller than that. They were hovering between the wall and the bed and slowly started to move towards the foot of it. At this point, they were no longer round. They were oblong and slowly pulsing as they moved. When they reached my sister's suitcase, they actually rose up above it and then went back down again and disappeared. All we could do was keep asking ourselves, did you see that? What was it? What could it mean? 2 nights in a row, how could this be? To this day, we haven't figured it out, but we think it could have been a message from loved ones that have passed. I have never been sensitive to this kind of phenomenon before or since, nor has my sister. A bridge to the other side. A few years back I went to a medium who speaks to those who have passed over. During my session with him, he informed me that my grandfather was there. He even gave me my grandfather's name. He told me that my grandfather wanted me to go to bingo and that he would make it worth my while. I used to go to bingo years ago but have not in many, many years. He told me that my grandfather would give me the feeling when it was time to go. So, that time arrived. I was washing dishes after supper one early evening, and there was a commercial on our local radio station about a bingo in my hometown, about an hour away, that was going to be quite the event. I brought it up to my husband and said, let's go to my parents, and you can hang out with the boys, they were little guys at this time, and you can visit with my parents. So off we went, and I went to bingo, and I won $200. On my arrival back into my parents' house, I announced that I won. Everyone was excited but, of course, wanted to see the money. Before I went to show them the money, I had an unbelievable feeling of freezing. I asked everyone if they felt that cold breeze that just went through. Everyone was talking to each other, no one seemed to have heard me. I said it again, and everyone kept talking. I felt a little weird and asked the 3rd time and said it quite loudly. Again, no response from anyone. My parents, my husband, and my 2 boys were all talking amongst themselves as if I wasn't even there. While the whole time, I was feeling this freezing breeze all around me. At the 4th time, as I'm trying to get everyone's attention, I'm no longer cold, and everyone now is looking at me. I asked them if anyone was hearing me talk and if they felt the freezing breeze go through, and no one heard me talk or felt a cold breeze. I was a bit weirded out, but continued to reach into my front pocket of my pants and take out the folded $200 all in $20 bills. As I unfolded the money, a smack dab in the middle of the folded money was a bridge of a fiddle. This money was counted out to me by the bingo attendant, and I also counted it out before I placed it in my pocket. There was absolutely no bridge of a fiddle anywhere near that money. I cannot explain to you how shocked I was to try and figure out how that bridge of a fiddle got into my pocket, let alone in between $10 and $20 bills. Now to get a bit more freaky here, my grandfather was a well-known fiddle player in my hometown with the locals when he was alive. My father had his father's, this same grandfather, 2 fiddles in safekeeping, and we were always warned as young kids to never touch the fiddles, and my boys were always warned to never touch the fiddles. My father was always scared they were going to get broken. As I was in shock, looking at this bridge, I kept asking everyone in the room if they put this in my pocket somehow, knowing in my head that there was no way I wouldn't feel someone's hand go into my pocket to place this there. And of course, everyone was telling me, no, they didn't put it in my pocket. My father was very concerned at this moment and told us all to follow him to his bedroom. He took the 2 fiddles out of their safe place, opened them up, and lo and behold, one of the 2 fiddles was missing a bridge. I cannot explain this story. The only thing I can say is that my grandfather would have had something to do with it if he could. I do believe that during the few seconds, moment, That I felt the freezing breeze, could it then have been when the bridge was placed in my pocket? The unexplainable happenings of Grandma's house. I've always known that unexplained entities exist in this world. I've never had a significant experience such as an apparition, and I'm thankful because I'd rather not, TBH, but I've experienced minor things here and there. 2 experiences I can recount occurred at my Oma, which is the German word for grandma, and Opa's house here in Hawaii, Kauai. I've also had quite a few family members share their more terrifying experiences with me over the years, which also happened in said house, but let's start with my own, from my most recent experience. I am currently a 27-year-old female, ancient, I know, and would often sleep over at Oma's house from 5 to 15 years old, mostly on weekends. I enjoyed being there, as she and I were really close. She spoiled me from when I could first talk, up until she lost her memory to dementia. Yeah, that depressing, evil disease that causes everyone you love some major suffering as you slowly forget who you and your family members are. Anyway, she was a huge jokester, always laughing, farting, tickling, making sarcastic remarks, and jumping out to scare Annie and all of her family members. It was a Friday night, and I was 14 years old. I was on the PC they had in their designated computer room because I couldn't sleep. The room is about the size of a bigger closet, just big enough to comfortably fit a desk, PC, and 2 chairs. If you're sitting on the chair facing the PC, the door is behind and to the left of you, so you can't see if someone comes in unless you turn to the left. Directly across the hallway is the room I would sleep in, and if you were to take a right outside of the computer room, you could see my grandparents' room at the other end of the hallway. Now I always had an ominous feeling being in that house when night would fall, especially after my grandparents went to bed and I was the only one awake. So there I was, on MSN Messenger, talking with one of my friends. The clock showed something between 1 and 2 a.m. I was starting to get sleepy, but being a teenager, it'd be way too uncool to sleep early on a Friday night. Because I was distracted, I felt completely at ease. No spooky feelings or chill in the air, nor was I the slightest bit paranoid. That is, until I feel someone blow lightly in my left ear, 2 times back to back. "Oma," I exclaimed, starting to laugh and turning to face her. Except, she wasn't there. It was no one. "Oma," I called while standing up out of the chair, fully expecting her to be hiding in my temporary room, as I peeked in, ready to surprise her. Empty. I then started to look down the dark hallway, knowing her room door would be open, which would prove she had snuck out to scare me. Closed. The door was closed. She always slept with it closed. She hadn't been the one to blow in my ear. My grandpa certainly isn't the type to play pranks on me. He is a hard-ass, old-school guy from the Philippines. This is the last thing he would do, nor is he fast enough to pull this sort of thing. I was the only other person in this house aside from them. If it wasn't either of them, who was it? Has anyone else felt something like this before that doesn't involve touching? My second encounter happened several years before this one. It was a holiday evening sometime back in the mid-2000s, and all of my Oma's children, 1 out of 4 being my mom, their spouses, and their children were over. I was around 9 years old and filled with energy. My cousin Derek, around 7 years old, and I were tossing a tennis ball back and forth in the house on the first floor. Everyone was either in the living room, kitchen, or in the front yard. There was a carpeted staircase that ran perpendicular from the living room and straight up to the second floor. From the bottom of the staircase, you could see most of the living room and obviously up the stairs. From the top of the staircase, you could see the staircase down to the bottom and a small fraction of the living room. It consisted of about 15 stairs and had its own light bulb so no one would have to blindly walk the stairs at night. We decided to move the ball tossing to the stairs because, why not? I was at the very top, and Derek was at the bottom. We were bouncing the ball lightly up and down the stairs for about 15 minutes until our parents told us to go eat dinner. I caught the ball and flicked the light switch for the stairwell to the down position to turn the light off, then ran down the stairs to get food. After making our plate, we sat in the living room. "Can you turn the light off?" my auntie asks me, being the last one to use the light in the stairwell. Puzzled, I looked up at the now illuminated bulb. I set my plate on the table, charged up the stairs, flicked the switch down again, and ran back down the stairs. A few minutes go by, and we're shoveling our faces with delicious food. "I thought Auntie Tammy asked you to turn the light off." My mom questions me. My heart sank as I looked up at the stairlight once again. "I did turn it off," I said confidently. "The switch was up so I made sure I turned it down and saw the light shut off while I was up there." My mom looked at me, unconvinced. "I don't think so," she says. "No, I saw her turn it off," my auntie explains. I saw it turn back on too when she came downstairs after a few seconds, but I didn't want to say anything. My grandparents have passed away for some years now, and the house has been sold, a decision that was agreed upon by their children. I have had dreams of being in that house over the years, and honest to God, they've never been good. Not a single good dream. They always involve an evil entity residing there. My family knows the new owners of the house and is contacted every so often. Apparently, they've had quite a few unexplainable occurrences of their own since moving in. I'm curious to know if anyone has any idea of what this all means. Is it evil? Am I just paranoid? Or do my dreams carry a sort of truth to them? I figure everyone has at least one experience with the unknown, paranormal, or unexplained that they carry with them. Many times, it's hard to talk about these experiences openly due to fear of judgment or others not believing us. Share your experience to prove that these happenings are more common than we think. Mine is below. This was around July of 2021. I was living in NYC for university. The pandemic was still in full swing there, so I was pretty isolated in my apartment and living with a roommate. I remember sleeping in one morning, maybe until around 12 p.m. As I was waking up from my sleep state, I remember getting an intense sleep paralysis. I couldn't move my body or open my eyes, but I was fully awake. This wasn't the first time I experienced sleep paralysis, so I just did my usual attempts at wriggling my fingers and toes, breathing in and out, etc. until I came out of it. But this time, I started to feel a presence next to me in bed. I could literally feel the mattress sink down as though someone just laid down next to me. The next thing I remember is feeling their hands graze up my chest and their legs wrap around my waist as though someone was snuggling up next to me. Even their breath on my neck. At this point I was convinced my roommate had come into my room and started being weird to me as I was sleeping. It felt that real. I remember taking my hands and touching this entity's legs, and I could even feel their leg hairs with such detail. Next thing I know, I snap out of it, and I'm lying awake in my bed covered in sweat. No one was there. I know that sleep paralysis sometimes comes with weird hallucinations, but this felt so real. I still can't explain it, and I wonder if anyone else has had anything similar happen during sleep paralysis. My experience with the unexplained in my childhood home. I grew up in central Indiana in the 9-county region. My parents had kids before they were ready, and it resulted in us not having much money growing up. My parents struggled to make ends meet, and it resulted in my grandparents raising me for large portions of the day so that my parents could work. My grandparents' home had a storied past. It was built in the mid-1800s, prior to the onset of the Civil War. Supposedly, the first owner was a stop on the Underground Railroad, and this resulted in the house having false walls that opened up to small enclosed areas. It was bizarre, and my friends thought it was the coolest thing to have these tiny passages throughout the house. My father actually grew up in the place too. It was a 2-story single-family dwelling with an attic and a basement. Growing up, my father and grandfather would crack jokes about Mr. Cooper. I didn't know anyone by that name, and when asked, my father would always say that the guy was just the previous owner of the home. I didn't think much of it at the time. I just knew that my father wasn't overly fond of the second floor of the home and wouldn't take anything upstairs to the second floor unless the sun was out. Again, I was a child and thought nothing of this as I only stayed on the first floor anyway. My grandparents died when I was a child and left the home to my father because of his financial issues at that time. There were 3 bedrooms at the top of the stairs, with a staircase leading down to the first level. My brother and I were forced to share one of these rooms because the middle bedroom had been converted into a junk room over time by my grandparents. They were born prior to the onset of the Great Depression and rationing in World War II. As a result, they kept everything and just stored it in this one room. The door was hard to open because of the amount of junk in there, and it was stacked so densely that there wasn't really anywhere to walk. If you've ever seen an episode of Hoarders, that one room looked like that, just without the dead animals and decaying food. My sister had the 3rd bedroom to herself, which we referred to as the blue room because the walls were painted blue. My grandmother seemed to dread that particular room, but I thought nothing of it at the time. My bedroom and the blue room were the locations of the only 2 false walls I knew about. Both of the closets had a wall that required a minimal amount of force to expose a smaller closet on the other side. Because my grandmother died when I was a child, I never thought to ask why she hated that room. I know why she hated it now. It only took a year to find out. On Christmas Eve in 2001, I was sleeping in the blue room with my brother and sister. The house predated central heating and cooling. Instead, the house had a fireplace that heated the entire house through a network of pipes that fed the smoke through a couple of chimneys. We also depended on window-mounted air conditioners to cool the house in each room. These were the same units my grandparents bought with analog dials to set temperature that made a click sound every time you turned it. As such, we tended to congregate in whichever room was cooler or hotter to sleep in. On that particular night, it was the blue room. On that night, I was woken up by the bedroom door slipping open and opening slightly. We had pets, so my assumption was that one of the animals wanted to warm up too. As I attempted to go to sleep, I heard the air conditioner come on and the clicking of the temperature dials. I sat up to look over at the machine and saw nothing there, just the dials turning back and forth. I yelled for my sister to get up, and the dials suddenly stopped turning. At that moment, the door just shut the rest of the way on its own. My brother was still sound asleep, but my sister and I sat there terrified. We had to yell for our parents to turn on the staircase light, which was on the other side of that door, before either of us would leave. Needless to say, I never slept in that room again. Flash forward a couple of years to somewhere in 2003 or 2004. My dad works his tail off to get a high-paying position that results in us doing some renovations to the house, including my bedroom. In that time, the only unusual activity I had ever heard was footsteps upstairs once in a while during the night and periods where I felt like I was being watched or I wasn't alone, despite knowing that no one else was there. Because of the renovations, the curtain rods had not yet been installed on my bedroom windows. The only bedroom windows that I had faced a county road that ran just in front of the house, which resulted in any car going by having its headlights flood my bedroom with light. It was late that night, and I woke up to a scratching sound coming from the wall behind my bed. The sound was so loud that my brother woke up too. This wasn't especially odd, as we had some vermin get into the walls during the renovations and were still in the process of getting them out. However, it didn't stop at scratching. What was scratching turned into what sounded like finger tapping on the wall, and then it was full-blown knocking. To this day, I believe those sounds came from that hidden room. My brother and I shot up out of bed as soon as we heard that knocking and were grabbing our stuff to leave. At that moment, I immediately got that feeling that we weren't alone again. A passing car suddenly filled the room with light, and because of the physics of light coming from a passing car, it basically provided light to the room in stages and then faded out. As the light began to fade, my brother and I saw a dark humanoid figure standing by the window. It didn't have any features at all, I just remember it being a figure, and it was gone once all of the light was gone from the room. My brother and I then dashed out of that room screaming. From that point on, we refused to sleep up there at all and slept downstairs in the living room. Quite frankly, I didn't want to go up there for anything anymore. Flash forward again to 2010. I don't go up there for anything beyond clothes and, like my father, will only go so long as the sun is out. The unexplained footsteps still happen once in a while, but nothing prepared me for what was going to happen on one particular night. I had already been a couple of years into college at this point and went to an out-of-state university just to get away from the place, so I was only there for several weeks out of the entire year. My brother was going through some mental health stuff at that time and destroyed the door at the bottom of the staircase leading upstairs by tearing it off of the hinges. My father just left it in the stairwell to fix it later, but never got around to the later. I was sleeping on the couch in the downstairs living room, where I had been sleeping since that incident in 2004. My brother and sister were out with friends, and my parents had gone out on a date night, leaving me alone with the animals. I woke up to my cats hissing at what I assumed was one another, but on closer inspection, it appeared to be the dining room, where that doorway to the staircase was. Suddenly, I heard a series of footsteps in the junk room directly above the living room, where I was. I was caught off guard because, again, there wasn't anywhere to walk in that room. I then heard the creaking of the door leading to that junk room, which again made no sense. The door opens heading into the room, and there was so much crap in there that my father couldn't bear to part with after the death of his parents that you couldn't open it easily. I was already getting up to head out into the dining room because the front door to the house was there. I had no intention of staying in that place by myself with Mr. Cooper. Suddenly, those footsteps sounded like they were jogging down the stairs to come into the dining room with me. As they got louder, I realized they were getting closer to ground level, and I made a beeline for the front door. Just as I was leaving, I heard the sound of a crash as the broken door flew across the room into a curio cabinet that smashed one of its glass walls. The footsteps were so loud I could hear them darting back up the stairs. I drove away from the area to a department store a few miles away and told my parents to meet me there. I refused to ever be in that home alone. Thankfully, once I got back to college again, my parents informed me that my father had a new job across the country, and I wouldn't have to go back. I don't know what Mr. Cooper is, but the house was ultimately torn down. We couldn't sell it because nobody wanted it. The person who ultimately bought it wanted it exclusively for the land and not the structures on it. It was to their benefit. I couldn't imagine putting anyone else through what I saw, and I don't know that my parents would have been forthright over it out of fear it would scare buyers away. In any case, I'd say that Mr. Cooper got what he wanted because we all left, but he's homeless now. I'm a deep skeptic, but when I was a child, I was doing a 12 Days of Christmas event where we would doorbell ditch neighborhoods with themed gifts. This was in northern Arizona. Out at one of the neighborhoods that was at the edge of the desert, we were making a turn with me and my friends in the bed of the truck, and we saw a man crouched down at the end of a cul-de-sac, right under the street light. And I immediately assumed it was a homeless man, but I wondered why they were so far away from the city. Then I realized he was crouched directly under the light, and he was just a dark silhouette. As we were driving away, he stood up and walked in 2 separate directions. I swear it. One turned into two separate strides in incongruous directions, and there was an ugly dread in my gut, like deeply primal. And I turned to my friend to make sure he'd seen what I'd seen, and his face fell, and he quietly said, "I have to go home. Right now." My friend was Navajo and believed he'd just seen a Ye-Naldlashi, Skinwalker, and to this day I wouldn't have a solid argument against it. Late night encounter. I used to live in a rough neighborhood with my family. It was filled with junkies and wasn't overall very safe. I've lived in this neighborhood my whole life, basically until recently when I moved. I had a few stalkers, and I've had to call the cops on my neighbors, but that's not the point of this story. That's just for perspective. My parents never really got along well with the owners of the house. They were elderly, and they didn't want to fix any of the problems that were wrong with it. My mother fought with them for years to install an air conditioner that we only got to use for about a year, maybe less. My room was at the front of the house, yet it was at the end of the house. The layout is confusing, but to try and put it simply, my windows were easy access to the front yard if I wanted to sneak out instead of having to walk all the way to the front door. I lived in this house for about 5 years, during COVID and lockdown. That whole period. I've always believed in the paranormal and supernatural. It was a way to make life more interesting. I'd watch ghost stories and horror movies religiously as a child, even though I probably shouldn't have. I grew to have a habit of staying up really late to all night during lockdown. There are times I've accidentally scared myself shitless because of the ghost stories, legends, and myths. I've had a few encounters with the unexplained throughout my life. I would call myself a medium of sorts. At the start, I was shadowing people and hearing my name when no one was around or in a crowd of people, sensing a presence when no one was around. Stuff like that. It wasn't until I was getting into witchcraft when things started to get interesting, let's say. One particular night I was staying up late as usual. I needed to go to the bathroom, and since it was dark, I used my phone flashlight as a way to get to the bathroom and back to my room regardless of whether I'd memorized the layout of my house. I'm not one to get scared or have to try to run back to my room once the lights were off, just to be clear. I used the bathroom, and everything felt alright. Nothing happened as usual when I exited the toilet. I usually expect to see something jump out at me at night, so I brace myself for nothing. While I was washing my hands, something felt off. As if I was being watched. I look up at the window to see nothing, only the textured glass so that no one could see into the bathroom. I dry my hands, grab my phone again, and walk closer to the bathroom door. The closer I got, the more tense I felt, as if I was being warned to not get closer. I ignored it because I wanted to go back to my bed. After I leave the bathroom, the only light being from my phone's flashlight, I feel something right behind me. I don't turn around to look at it only because I don't want to see something I shouldn't. I've read stories and myths where people are told not to look at entities because they could take you or something like that. I don't turn around in fear or worth, I guess. But I was frozen for a bit. I couldn't move while I felt this presence get closer. My fight or flight instincts kicked in when I felt something grab my shoulder. I would say I sprint, but I didn't. It was like 2 a.m. and my entire family was asleep, and I didn't want to risk waking them, so I fast walked as quietly as I could. I felt it follow me and only disappear once I entered my room. Those crystals my mother brought me, which promised to protect me, must have worked at that time. I jumped into my bed and hid under the covers, as any adolescent would do. I ended up falling asleep not long after, terrified of what was there that night. To this day, I still don't know what it was. This has been haunting me for almost 16 years. I've been unable to explain it, and I still wake up with nightmares. My sister has her own explanation that has fluctuated over the years, but I was never satisfied by her explanation. I used to have photo evidence for some of this, but they've been misplaced or possibly destroyed. This was back during the transition from film to digital, and, unfortunately, my evidence was film-based. Convenient, I know. I'm going to try to put as much detail as I can into this, so bear with me. Anyway, part of this story I was present, and part of it is secondhand. While several people and adults, even medical professionals, were eventually involved. The main people were myself, 12, my sister, we'll call her River, aged 17, and our neighbor, we'll call him Ben, aged 17. Now, despite our age difference, my sister and I are very close. We've been through some serious shit together, and she's transitioned from a second mom to my best friend as I grew up. We are still very close, but this event is the one thing she is extremely unwilling to discuss. Okay, so during the summer of 2002 I slept on her bedroom floor almost constantly. She worked at a movie theater, and the movie signs had ducked my shit right the hell up. That and some general separation anxiety meant I was not sleeping alone. Ever. So the night in question I was camped out on her floor, right alongside her bed, as close as I could get without being in the twin bed with her. I don't remember anything out of the ordinary happening before we went to bed. I know it was an early night because I had swim practice in the morning and she had to get up and take me before heading off to her summer job. Here's where I have to switch to a second-hand account because I don't remember anything else until we woke up around 3 a.m. My sister recounts that she felt really uneasy and struggled to fall asleep for a few hours. When she finally did, it was as though she was automatically dreaming. The dream she remembers is that her boyfriend at the time was leading her by the hand around a huge house. She was impatient in the dream and wanted to arrive wherever they were going, but her boyfriend kept hushing her. Finally, they came to a door that was slightly ajar and light from within. Her boyfriend gestured for her to enter and hung back. She pushed open the door and was immediately blinded by the white interior. When her eyes adjusted, she could see something standing in the room. She can't really describe what she saw, to be honest. She says when she tries to recall what it looks like, her mind almost slips like she's thinking right past it, her words, and her brain won't compute what she's seeing. But she knew immediately she was in the same room with a sentient being, for lack of a better word. She also felt immediate terror for her well-being, and in her dream she spun around and caught the door as it was beginning to close. As she's escaping, she hears a voice say, "Better go get her. She'll never come in here on her own again." Then she woke up. Except she didn't just wake up, she woke up screaming. I remember being ripped from my sleep to the sound of my sister screaming so shrilly I honestly didn't even register what the sound was a scream until I saw her thrashing around in her bed. I still have nightmares that I hear her screaming. It makes my stomach hot and tight just thinking about it. I turned on the light and tried to ask her what was wrong. Almost immediately she goes still. Like the sound of my voice had reattached her mind to reality. Really quietly, she whispers that nothing is wrong and to go back to bed. I remember how she looked so vividly. She had really large eyes, and I remember distinctly feeling a jolt when she looked at me because her pupils looked huge and she was so pale. I took her at her word that everything was well and laid back down, but we left the light on. Neither of us slept much. Every few minutes she would sit up and ask me, "Where are you going?" Despite me never moving an inch. I was horrified by the terror in her voice. We didn't question this until the next day, but despite her screaming so hard that she burst a blood vessel in her eye, my parents did not stir in the next room, nor did we think to go get them. I've had one other experience like this that was pretty unexplainable also a few years later, but it's not quite the same and a total tangent. The only way to describe it is a terror vacuum. No one else can help you. Nothing outside of what you are experiencing exists. You are stuck in a fear loop, and all that matters is the second you are experiencing. I don't know if anyone else has experienced this. I think I must have fallen asleep because I remember waking up to find my sister sitting next to me. She looked and sounded totally normal. We share the gift of compartmentalizations, and so we just got up, got ready, and she dropped me at practice. Later that afternoon, we decided to go to our neighborhood pool. River and I were changing when I saw red on her hip. Situated below her pants line and a few inches above her hip bone was a bloody scab in the shape of a V and two mole dots next to it. I asked her immediately what had happened, and she had no idea but started hyperventilating. We called our mom in to look at it. She asked if River had dropped her curling iron on herself. River said no. Mom asked if she hurt herself on purpose to get that shape. River said no. Mom asked if it hurt. River said no. I remember the dream for the first time at that moment and told my mom about it. She decided she must have thrashed around and hurt herself, but she made an appointment with our doctor just to be safe. I think she just was super weirded out and didn't know what else to do, honestly. When we got to the doctor, he seemed really confused and looked at the mark for a long time before asking River if she spilt something on herself. He said it looked like a horrible chemical burn except with zero blistering, and it looked like it was a few weeks old. Not to mention it looked like someone had drawn the V in circles on her. They were so perfect. Not at all natural. I had been sharing a room with her for months, and I can attest, she didn't have that mark before that dream. He marked the burst blood vessel, the burn, and her general reluctance to talk and sat us both down, separate from our mom, to see if we had been hurt. We hadn't. He then asked our mom to allow him to drug test her, which River said was totally fine with her. When it came back clean, it only showed we weren't lying. It gets weirder. Our neighbor across the street had woken up with similar burns from that same night. He had them on his chest, in the shape of hand prints with inhumanly long fingers. He showed my sister and me later that week when she asked why he hadn't been around. We typically saw him and his sister every day during the summer. Ben swore he didn't have a dream but actually woke to something holding down his chest. He couldn't describe it either and felt like he could see everything in the room, but his eyes would just slip over whatever was on his chest. His parents were very religious, so we didn't get to talk to him much about it, and he ended up having a mental breakdown shortly after this and spent most of his senior year in a mental hospital. His parents had a priest exorcise their house and ended up, I shit you not, boarding over Ben's bedroom. My parents tried to talk to him, as they were kind of desperate for information regarding his burn, but they wouldn't talk to them. Meanwhile, my sister's burned and stayed for months. It eventually became a very red scar. We had photos of her at the beach the next summer, and it's still there. Now, River used to claim this was aliens. Then she said she didn't know what happened. Then she stopped talking about it at all. I never bought the alien explanation. If she had gotten out of bed, she would have stepped on my face. The story of her experience fit with abduction stories, but Ben's didn't, despite being on the same night and ending in the same burns. I always wondered if it was something demonic. I would love to hear theories.